Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Iron Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Policeman Deku Was S-Rank Healer? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. An introduction. The sludge villain was laughing, fire surrounding him and smoke pouring out of nearby buildings, leering at the heroes who stood by and stared with clenched teeth. Now, usually, Izuku didn't get involved during villain attacks when heroes were on scene. He stepped in sometimes when there were intense injuries, or if they looked overwhelmed, but not often. Sure, he wanted to help, but he wasn't on duty 24/7, it wasn't his place to step in for usual villain attacks. So most of the time he just watched and cataloged everything he could as it panned out. Usually it went fine, the heroes proving themselves perfectly capable, and he'd move along with his day. This time, however, there was a hostage and the heroes weren't moving. This time, the barely visible blonde child being held as that hostage by the villain was his best friend. Katsuki was a pain in his butt and everything, but Izuku'd be dead before he let Katsuki get hurt while he stood by doing nothing. Izuku glared at the scene and unslung his backpack from his shoulder. Placing it on the ground and rifling through it, he pulled out the item he promised his mother he'd only use in self-defense. Well, technically it was self-defense. She didn't want Katsuki to suffocate now, did she? He also grabbed his main weapon for situations like these. Gripping both items, Izuku sprinted forward, past the police officers holding back the crowd, past the stunned and still heroes, and into the fire zone. Idiot! Stop! Ah, death arms, it's sort of cute he thought he could stop Izuku. The sludge villain turned, eyes coming into view with Katsuki's head seemingly in his mouth, and pulled back a massive hand for a slimy punch. Izuku narrowed his eyes and flicked his wrist, launching his throwing knife straight into the villain's eye. The villain cried out, head reeling back with pain and surprise, punch forgotten. It was a dumb mistake really, letting Izuku get close. Not that he was any less dangerous at long range. It was stupid to touch those Izuku valued at all. Izuku reached the sludge body of the villain, he flicked his taser to live, and pressed it into the sludge. Izuku ignored the warbled screaming, the sludge trying to pull away, the crowd and heroes yelling behind him, even the roaring fires surrounding him. For every move the sludge made backwards, Izuku advanced with his taser in the mass of green goo. Izuku grinned a little bit ferally when the sludge villain started shaking apart, wobbling screams and toppling goo falling off until he was nothing but a pool of green glob, eyes rolling on the ground uselessly. Katsuki, of course, was coughing his lungs out in the middle of said pool of sludge, and Izuku grabbed his arm and hauled him back towards the crowd. Someone collect the villain. Izuku ordered loudly, Katsuki finally slumping in realization. Izuku was in charge right now. I have secured the hostage, but we need a way to contain the villain. We need immediate medical attention for the victim. Someone call an ambulance and a team of medics. Now. Izuku had walked all the way to where the heroes were still frozen, and with one glare he had Katsuki sitting on the ground, arms folded with a pout. Hey kid, what right do you have to order us around? Izuku raised his eyebrow at the hero. The baseball hero, Slugger. Izuku drawled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his card. I am Midoriya Izuku, healer identification number 177908, ranking A. The hero paled and took a step back. I'm not finished. Izuku clicked his tongue as he flipped the card over to show the other side. I am Midoriya Izuku, and I am a police investigator for the Musutafu Prefecture. I outrank you on 2 levels. And if you don't follow my orders, I'll take it up with your hero manager. Do as the healer says. Death Arms yelled. He then eyed Izuku more seriously. How old are you, healer Midoriya? Izuku hummed and started checking Katsuki over slowly. No burns from the taser. Good job not removing the rubber inserts I added to your uniform. Minor oxygen deprivation. No concussion. Izuku nodded. You'll need immediate chest x-rays to check for lingering sludge in your lungs, but otherwise you're just fine. Katsuki growled at him but said nothing. Healer, I'm talking to you. Izuku glared up at him, not moving from where he had crouched with a hand on Katsuki's shoulder. and I am with a patient at the moment. You've seen my credentials, so my age is irrelevant. He narrowed his eyes at the hero. Speak to me in such a way again and I'll add to my report that you impeded my medical examinations. You understood, sir? Izuku rolled his eyes and started tapping on his phone, calling the precinct. Hello, Musutafu Police Department. Hi, this is Investigator Midoriya. I need 10 officers at XXX Street Crossing XXX. We're in need of a cleanup crew for a villain made up of an unknown slimy substance. Gloves recommended, hazmat suits are unnecessary. Understood, Midoriya. We'll have them sent over right away. ETA approximately 10 minutes to your location. She hung up and Izuku sighed. Izuku stood, pocketing his phone, and cupped his hands over his mouth to yell loudly, Kamui Woods. Healer on scene. I need every person you pulled from the fires brought to me for immediate medical screening. Right away. Kamui Woods yelled back. Izuku turned back to the other two heroes, just in time for an ambulance to show up. Although, the press had also finally stopped filming subtly from the back, and were approaching. Medics spilled out as Backdraft seemed to be finally getting the fires under control. Thanks for coming. Izuku said to the medics, Here, this group likely has smoke inhalation and should be checked for minor injuries. Izuku pointed to the growing number of people being brought down by Kamui Woods. They weren't involved in the main fight. Several nodded, over half heading over and speaking gently to the group. This here is the main victim. He'll need to be transported to the hospital for x-rays of the lungs. His name is Bakugo Katsuki. He was being suffocated and I wouldn't be surprised if he has sludge in there. Don't worry about rushing or using the sirens, just get him there. Paramedics moved, some heading for the second vehicle and some headed closer for Katsuki. Young man, Katsuki growled at the medic, baring his teeth, and Izuku frowned. Katsuki. He looked up at the sharp tone, face surprised. You will go to the hospital. You will sit quietly. You will do exactly as they say, and when you are done, you will be discharged and Mistuki will pick you up. Are we clear? Katsuki's eyes widened. Izuku never used his authority on Katsuki, and clearly the boy was surprised. Well, fine. Let's just go already. Katsuki got slowly to his feet and crossed his arms defiantly as the medic beckoned him to the ambulance. Izuku nodded his approval as Katsuki looked over his shoulder and the boy scowled. Same old Katsuki. Hey, I saw you take down the villain. Damn it, Izuku hated the media. He turned and headed over, several cameras and mics pointing at him eagerly. Can you tell us who you are? You're ordering people around as if you're in charge. Izuku didn't glare, but looked into the camera seriously. I am Healer Midoriya, also a police investigator of the Musutafu Police Department, and I am in charge. The reporter grinned, clearly elated. We've seen footage of a new rank A healer in the area, but you avoid the media so much we never get anything. Tell us, are you really rank A? You're so young. Some healers never make it past rank D or C. Do you have any comments? She smiled at him, several nearby looking just as hungry. My training and the process of becoming a healer is private information. Izuku said firmly. However, I will say I am perfectly qualified as you're already aware. Despite this, can you tell us the qualifications? Do you have a healing quirk? Every good healer needs one. Some yelled. Izuku glared at the camera, actually glared, and a few people holding the mics flinched. Anyone can be a healer, regardless of their quirk status. Izuku said firmly. Anyone can be whatever they want to be, hero, healer, teacher, plumber, whatever. They could be quirkless for all I care. Asking people about their quirks as if it was their worth is barbaric. Several reporters looked annoyed, and others looked astonished. My qualifications are none of your concern, though anyone wishing to be a hero or a healer should be strong, and definitely no basic defense at the very least. A mic was shoved closer as a man struggled forward, eager and completely ignoring Izuku's small speech. Being a rank A is a big deal. The only other living rank A healer in Japan is Recovery Girl. You didn't answer the question about your quirk. He yelled, changing the subject. Izuku lightened his glare. My quirk is my business and mine alone. Izuku said, but he faced the camera and let his eyes flash with glowing gold irises for a single moment. There was immediate screaming for more, for interviews, for details, and Izuku didn't react. If you'll excuse me, I have to file a report with my senior officer. Izuku strode away, towards the police putting the bags of slime into a truck for transport to Tartarus. Izuku didn't approve that villains didn't get trials anymore, and it wasn't a secret, but he never challenged the rules. It wasn't his job. Medics. Izuku nodded to a few on his way by. Anything to report? A few stopped. A few with minor smoke inhalation, as you said. Not much to be done, just handed out water bottles and said to head to the hospital if any other symptoms showed up. Izuku nodded in approval, and looked to the next medic who approached. My group had some minor cuts and bruises, some reluctantly admitted it was from the wooden bindings used on them. I recommended ice for their bruises, and I cleaned and bandaged the cuts. Izuku nodded again, and looked at the last medic. Nothing to report from my group. No injuries or smoke inhalation, just people who looked scared from the attack. None were in shock. Good, thank you for your hard work. Make sure all of this goes in your medical report. Tell the hospital to send me the file for inspection. Number 177908. They all nodded, and Izuku approached the officer standing with his hands on his hips who was staring at the vehicle full of bags of slime. He turned as Izuku approached and grinned. Midoriya, we finished up here. Would you like a ride to the station? One officer asked. He was a supervisor, by the look of his clean uniform and lack of gloves. Izuku nodded. That would be appreciated. Thank you. The officer smiled and led Izuku to a waiting police car. Do you want to drive? The man looked suddenly unsure of himself, and Izuku resisted a laugh. I'd love to, but I'm still underage. Go ahead. The officer looked as if he was trying not to look too relieved. He wasn't succeeding, but he was trying anyway. Hop in then. Izuku slid into the passenger seat and the officer started the car. They were off, leaving the nearly cleared scene behind them. So why'd you step in? Witnesses say there were 4 heroes on scene. Death Arms attempted a single punch to the slime, with no effect. He did not engage again. Izuku reported. Backdraft was focusing on the fires, and Kamui Woods was leading the rescue of nearby civilians. Slugger just stood there staring. MD Lady claimed to be unable to help, but was just using her quirk badly. The police officer on scene had his hands full with crowd control, and people were yelling about suitable quirks. The man driving winced. The whole precinct knew how Izuku felt about that. Understood. How did you execute the takedown? The office asked. I threw my knife into his left eye, and then used my police taser on his main body and held contact for over 10 seconds. Izuku said blankly. The officer paled. But you're not supposed to? Mutation quirks aren't included in the regulation files that prohibit an officer from administering shocks for longer than 3 seconds. Izuku said, shrugging. It's because of the increase in the possibility of villains exactly like the sludge villains who can just tank the electricity. The officer pulled into the station and parked, nodding slowly. Man, I need to reread those regulations and restrictions. Izuku nodded. I have a list of every one of them in my bedroom. Handwritten, of course, without the embellishments added by the commission. I read it every morning. Geez, Midoriya, don't you think that's a little excessive? The officer laughed nervously. No. Izuku denied as he got out of the car. I don't get to make mistakes. He shut the car door and didn't wait for the man as he entered the station and flashed his card at the front desk lady. Jizuno. Izuku nodded to her. I need to file a villain incident report. I already have it ready for you, Midoriya. She smiled, handing the paper on a clipboard over the desk to him. I figured you'd want to do it, since you called it in. Izuku nodded. Thank you. I'll be in the back room. The main part of the station wasn't large, but it was big enough. There was a main lobby, and Tsukachi's office to the left with a meeting room attached to it. The back room was the main area for the officers. It was separated into 2 halves, with a sitting lounge on one side and cubicles on the other. There were also 2 bathrooms attached to the lobby, without genders on either, and a barracks with places for officers to sleep during the graveyard shifts. Of course, there was the area for criminals, which was much larger. Holding cells, quirk nullifying areas, labs, interrogation rooms in different sections, the whole works. It was the reason there was only 1 station in the whole of Musutafu. They were well equipped and ready for villains. Izuku found his desk and plopped down with a sigh. He reluctantly took out his phone and dialed his mother. "I saw you on TV." His mother said immediately upon picking up. "Hi Mom, good to hear from you too." Izuku drawled. She huffed into her speaker. "Don't take that tone with me. You're lucky it was Katsuki, otherwise I'd be very disappointed in you. I didn't buy you knives for you to throw at villains randomly." She scolded. "I know, I only used them because it was Katsuki. I'd otherwise have thrown a rock, or something. I'd probably have stepped in regardless due to the hostage and lack of action from the on-scene heroes, though." Izuku said tiredly. "Also, the taser is police authorized, and the knives are small enough to be legal, you know that." "That's so not the point," she exclaimed. Then she sighed. "Oh, when will you be done with your report?" 3 hours maximum." He hummed in response. "I called to tell you I'm completely uninjured, and I didn't use my quirk. Katsuki should be at the hospital still, so send Mitsuki over to get him, will you?" "I can do that," his mother said firmly. She then softened her next words. "Are you really all right, sunshine?" "I'm good." Izuku smiled, a soft smile only for his mother. "Thanks for understanding. I'll be home soon. Ish." She laughed. "I'll push dinner back so we can eat together, but please have a little snack soon to tide you over." Izuku huffed. "I know. I have granola bars in my backpack, obviously." She laughed again. "Bye, Izuku. Focus on your work." "Will do. Bye." He hung up and sighed before clearing his mind to begin his report. He didn't know the name of the villain, never getting the chance to ask before he'd shocked the man unconscious. Nor his age, but he did put a villain name down. He dutifully filled out page after page of work, including details about what he'd said, how he'd managed the press, if applicable, on-scene heroes, and how many civilians were caught up in the attack. Izuku never minded the paperwork, though it could be tedious if he did it often enough. Izuku was lucky he barely did daylight work. He hated the press as much as Tsukachi. Thank the stars Izuku never had to do interviews. Izuku finished about 2 hours later, since the incident had been large and in broad daylight, and he headed back to the lobby to turn in his report. He had his backpack in one hand, the clipboard in the other. "Jizuno, I have my report." He handed over the clipboard of papers, and she smiled at his serious face. "Tsukachi wants you. Says it's the Night Stalker case." Izuku sighed. "Thanks, Jizuno." With that, Izuku turned towards Tsukachi's office and knocked lightly. "Tsukachi, it's Midoriya." "Come on in, Midoriya." Izuku swung the door open, eyes on the floor as he made sure not to hit anything Tsukachi may have left lying around, and shut it behind him. Izuku looked up and blinked. "You didn't tell me Eraserhead was coming. He's a graveyard shifter." Izuku said curiously as he took a step closer. It was true, Eraserhead only worked the overnight shifts due to his underground hero status. Tsukachi was seated, but Izuku didn't join him because the hero was standing. Power balances and all that. "He's joining the case. You're the main investigator, so he'll be reporting to you." Izuku eyed the hero and nodded. "Nice to meet you." Izuku bowed slightly. "I am Investigator Midoriya Izuku." The man nodded, eyes assessing but stance bored. "You failed to mention he was so young," came Eraserhead's tired voice from behind his capture scarf. "Midoriya is our best investigator. He's been an asset to this facility since he was 8 years old." Eraserhead's eyebrows shot up, and Izuku finally took his seat, the hero sitting as well. Izuku placed his backpack at his feet. "Isn't that a little young to be recruiting officers?" "I started my healer's training as soon as my quirk came in," Izuku said, Eraserhead turning to him. By the time I was 8, I had my emergency medic certificate and a junior healer license. As a healer, I was allowed on scenes. That's where I met Tsukachi here. Izuku gestured to the man. Tsukachi nodded. Kid's brilliant. The officer said bluntly. I asked him what his thoughts on the string of minor robberies causing the injuries seen, and he went into full analysis mode. He even picked up on their patterns of attack. We caught the main leader of the group in under a week. So you recruited a child? Eraserhead sighed. Not quite. When Midoriya started realizing his ideas were helping, he started just showing up to see me, asking for Tsukachi. Jizuno was so surprised, she rang me and we talked every time. His mother got sick of Midoriya sneaking out for this, and eventually said he was allowed to help with 1 case a week, as long as he was paid for his work. I accepted. I recruited myself, basically. Izuku nodded. By the time I was 10, I had a full healer's license, which grants me mild privileges to things that are usually age-capped. That's why I have a gun license as well as a motorcycle license, and of course, my investigation position within this facility. He may be young, but you'll be reporting directly to Midoriya during this investigation. Tsukachi said firmly. Eraserhead nodded. I can do that. Izuku pulled out his wallet and slipped out a card. This is my contact card. I have my work phone on me at all times, but please keep in mind I am still in middle school. Izuku handed the card over. It was nothing special, a white card with his name in larger letters and his information below that, but Izuku was rather proud to have the need for them at all. That's not to say I won't answer. The school is very understanding of my position, so if it's an emergency, don't hesitate to call me. The ringtone on said work phone will also wake me from dead sleep. Eraserhead raised an eyebrow, and Izuku grinned. Not a smile, but a full-on nearly feral grin. I take my work extremely seriously, and I don't have room to make mistakes. If you treat me the same as any adult in this precinct, you'll see why people don't mind my age around here. Understood. Eraserhead nodded, eyes a little bit more curious. Good, he really did understand then. I'm going to head out now, Tsukachi. My mother is expecting me. Izuku received a nod, and everyone stood as Izuku did. When are you next scheduled to come in? Tsukachi asked, glancing at his master schedule a little warily. Izuku resisted a grin at his exhaustion, and picked up his backpack to heave over one shoulder. I work mornings on Saturdays, so tomorrow morning I'll be reporting in around 4 am to relieve graveyard. I'll be off just after noon, and then I'll be at the Healer's Center until 6. Izuku waved to Eraserhead as he headed out. I hope you get in touch soon. Izuku was glad the station had a motorcycle at the precinct for him to use. He could have asked for a car, but it would have been a bother for whichever officer drove him home. No, the bike was much easier. Besides, the station had 3 total and any staff member with a license could take a vehicle from the station for 24 hours. No questions asked. Very useful indeed, and he took advantage of it nearly every day. Izuku picked his usual bike that was unofficially his, and snagged the helmet that was specifically his. He was a kid, so the usual helmet sizes they provided wouldn't fit him. Izuku unzipped his backpack and pulled out his leather jacket and gloves that he'd folded and stuffed into the bottom of his bag under all his school supplies. There was also a medical kit there, of course. He never went anywhere without those. He threw his riding jacket over his school uniform and pulled on his gloves before securing the motorcycle helmet, and then he tightened the straps of his backpack as he climbed onto the bike. Izuku started it up, and then he was off. His mother had been hard to convince when he'd first gotten his license at the ripe age of 11. However, Izuku had won out in the end. Izuku knew he was lucky. His mother had always supported his decisions, even if she didn't always agree with them. She knew Izuku could do anything he put his mind to, and she'd also accepted that sometimes kids got hurt. And that was okay, as long as they got right back up and were ready as ever to try again, because that's what kids do. Once he'd been hurt after his accident, she'd finally understood. Izuku had never been more grateful for her understanding in that moment. He kicked the standout on his bike and swung his leg off, dismounting fully. Unclipping his helmet and shaking out his helmet hair, Izuku set the helmet on the bike and headed towards the stairs up to his floor. Upon finding his apartment, he turned the key and found himself being embraced by the warm air inside. "Mom, I'm home," Izuku called softly. Perfect timing. His mother's joyful voice came from the kitchen. "I just finished cooking and was about to put all the food away to keep it warm until you arrived, but I'll set the table instead." Izuku took off his shoes and slid his backpack off. He hung his leather jacket, tucking his gloves in the pocket, and headed into the main room. Izuku looked across the room, past the couches and TV, to see his mother in the kitchen dining room combo and plates of food waiting on the table as she washed her hands. "Thanks for this, Mom." Izuku gave her a smile. She beamed at him. "Wash up and we'll eat." With a nod, Izuku went to the sink to wash up, once again reminding himself how lucky he was. He really did love his mom. Tough life. Izuku slammed a hand down on his alarm clock and resisted a groan. He blinked, bleary eyes open as he sat up, rubbing his eyes. 1:30 a.m. Izuku climbed out of bed and began his Saturday morning routine. First, stretching. Izuku lifted both arms above his head, stretching as far as he could upwards before bending at the waist and touching the floor with his palms. He then stood and bent at the waist to both sides, arms up and leaning with him. He then jumped in place for a few moments, loosening his stiff joints. Finally done, he started the second step. 1:42 a.m. Izuku walked, a little bit more awake, to the bathroom and began brushing his teeth. Once that was finished, he jumped in the shower for 7 minutes and dried off. Walking back to his room, he got dressed in loose jeans and a long-sleeved shirt, knowing he'd be throwing on his police vest when he arrived at the station. He folded his pajamas in his bed and looked around. Step 3. 2:06 a.m. He sat in his desk chair and picked up his notebook, opening it and reading through the rules and regulations of the precinct, as well as what he'd written from the healer's guide. Finished, he shut the book and stood to stretch again, this time more quickly than the leisurely pace when waking up. 2:49 a.m. Izuku padded into the kitchen to start his and his mother's meals. Once he'd started working morning shifts on weekends, she'd started taking graveyard shifts at the hospital so they'd see each other briefly. She was a good nurse, and she was happy there. She usually came home around 3 a.m., and he always made sure she had a good meal before she went to bed. The door clicked open, and Izuku smiled as she made her way inside, exhausted. Izuku set her plate of food down on the table, and she plopped down heavily. "Good morning, did you have a good shift?" Izuku asked, sitting down with his own food. "Yeah, productive." His mother yawned and started eating. "There was a bus accident around 11, and so we had people coming in with everything from mild concussions to internal bleeding to crushed limbs." She smiled tiredly. "Thanks for the food." "Of course." Izuku smiled at her. "Did you lose anyone?" Ever since she'd come home blank-eyed and a little out of it after losing a patient, he'd been sure to ask so he'd know if she needed anything. "No, but one of them needed CPR and immediate healing on scene. I wasn't there, of course, but I heard about it." Izuku took her dish as she finished and started washing everything he used. "I'm glad it all worked out." Izuku hummed as she stood. He felt a kiss being pressed to the top of his head, and Izuku smiled. "Good night, sunshine, have a good shift," she called as he heard her footsteps fade away. Once he was done with the dishes, he headed for the door to grab his work bag and the shoes he wore specifically for work. He grabbed the keys for the bike, triple-checked he had everything and headed out. Izuku went down to the parking lot, started up his bike, and zoomed off. He grinned the whole way, enjoying the way the cold wind stung even through his jacket. Izuku found it all exhilarating. 3:32 a.m. Izuku sighed as he pulled into the station garage, already missing the thrill of the drive. He loved riding motorcycles, nothing really compared. He swung his leg over and hopped off, shelving his helmet and hanging the keys. Finally, he entered the station. "Morning, Midoriya, clocking in?" Izuku nodded as the man yawned, feline teeth on full display. "Good morning, Sansa. Yes. Have a nice shift." Izuku wrote his name on the check-in sheet and followed the cat mutant to the back room. He retrieved his police vest from his desk and then joined Sansa in the lounge. Eraser kept us on our toes again. I swear, that one brings in more criminals than all the other underground in this prefecture combined. I'm glad to be off in an hour. Izuku chuckled as he threw his jacket over the back of a chair, shrugged on the vest, and headed to the coffee bar. He's the best, after all. Izuku poured the hot chocolate powder into a cup, and reached for the espresso machine to use the milk steamer attachment. I met him yesterday, actually. He seemed like a good hero. Oh, what's your assessment of him? The voice was teasing, but real curiosity bled through as Izuku finished steaming the milk. He's serious. Izuku hummed, pouring the thicker and foamy milk into his chocolate powder. He takes everything at face value, absolutely no shit from anyone, and says what he thinks. Izuku paused in his stirring, a grin forming. Also, he's standing behind you because his shift ends in 5 minutes. Sansa squeaked as Izuku turned around to see Eraserhead standing in the doorway. Hello, Eraserhead. Nice shift. The man sighed. I have a report for you. Night Stalker hit again. Izuku headed over, sipping his foamy hot chocolate happily. Situation? Izuku asked as he headed for his desk and placed his hot chocolate down. Eraserhead handed him the file. Night Stalker went after a group of his usual targets. A group of girls then, between the ages of 17, and he snagged them outside a club, though 3 of the 5 weren't intoxicated. Night Stalker used his quirk on 2 of them, and the other 3 started screaming for help. I arrived 2 minutes later after he was already gone, but the bodies were still warm and even still bleeding. All dead though. Izuku's eyes swept the file as the man spoke, soaking in the details. There was evidence of the man's quirk all over 2 of the bodies. The inky blackness spreading into their veins was definitely his signature. But something about it was off. There were punctures near their wrists, and the other 3 had been shot in the chest. This wasn't Night Stalker. Izuku announced, eyes not leaving the report. What? Eraserhead exclaimed. Explain. It matched previous sightings from other undergrounds as well as police. It's a copycat. Izuku said, flicking between photos and reports. Night Stalker has a gun, yes, but all of his kills with it were perfect headshots in the center of the forehead. His quirk is a contamination mutation emitter type. His fingernails lethal as they stretch and dig into the victim's skin. The contamination is a type of poison that leaches oxygen from the blood and tissue, killing the victim in under a minute. It also leaves distinct crescent moon-shaped marks where his nails make contact. See here? Izuku tilted the file, showing close-ups on the contaminated veins. No crescents. There are puncture marks, barely visible in this shot but very clearly from a needle insertion. My best guess is the 2 that were contaminated were caught first, and the copycat couldn't reach the other 2 with his syringes. He shot them, dead accurate in the heart, but it doesn't match the headshot MO we have for Night Stalker. Izuku finally glanced up, and paused when he saw Eraserhead looking deep in thought. You're sure? Was all the man said. Izuku nodded firmly, snapping the report shut. Absolutely positive. Dark eyes bore into determined green ones, and Eraser nodded. Do you want me to add it to the investigation file? Izuku shook his head, placing the report folder on his desk. He picked up his hot chocolate and held it in both hands, absorbing its warmth. No, you've done enough for tonight. Thank you. I'll organize my evidence in a secondary screening report and then hand it in to be added and organized for further inspection. Izuku and Eraserhead headed back to the lounge, away from Izuku's desk, and Izuku gestured to the coffee bar. Eraserhead obliged, heading for his usual death coffee that Izuku had been warned on his first day years ago not to touch. You can go home, your shift ended 6 minutes ago. I appreciate your help with this case. Eraserhead said nothing for a while, before speaking firmly and suddenly. You're clearly intelligent and certified. Eraserhead said bluntly as he finished making his coffee. Why not do more field work? I've seen your file. Most of your cases are shadow cases. You work as intelligence away from the action. The only times you intervene is during active scenes you're nearby for. Are you not trained in combat? I am. Izuku hummed, leaning back on a chair with his arms crossed thoughtfully. I'd be useful in the field, but it goes against my healer license code to do field work for the police until high school. Emergency response is allowed, but not anything for my main cases. Izuku rolled his eyes as Eraserhead turned around, coffee in hand. They say I'm too valuable to risk. Once I'm 15 and in high school, they can't exactly stop me, however. Eraserhead nodded. Healers are stiff like that. He agreed. Izuku sighed. Have a good day, Eraserhead. Get some sleep. The man nodded and headed out, seemingly chugging his coffee. Izuku sipped his hot chocolate, hiding an amused smile. What an interesting hero he was. Midoriya, we have a new string case for you. Izuku sipped his chocolate as he pushed off the chair he leaned against. Situation. Izuku followed the officer he faintly recognized into the lobby. Izuku nodded to Jizuno, and into the meeting room attached to Tsukachi's office. 6 murders all at night. The officer said, pushing the door open. Villain leaves a calling card. That's the only reason we know it's the same killer. Victim profiles? Izuku held out a hand, and was given a thick folder. He flicked through it. There's no seeming connection. Different quirks, features, jobs, skills, ethnic backgrounds, gender, all of it. Izuku raked his eyes down the victims. Bijiko Mimiya. Age, 19. Quirk, bone growth. Regeneration type quirk that made their bones regrow and mend themselves in seconds. Muscles and nerves can still be damaged, with minor strength enhancement. Jakuza Luina. Age, 62. Quirk, Stampede. Power-up type that allows the user to pump their body with adrenaline, giving them strength and abilities they wouldn't usually possess. Fukuya Polio. Age 6. Quirk, Octopus. Mutant type that causes the user to possess the limbs of an octopus. Suction cups are functional and can't be turned off. So on and so on. Izuku assessed every person individually before making his first hypothesis. I believe the connection has to do with enhanced strength capabilities. Izuku said, standing to pin each profile to the corkboard. He pulled out a pen and began making notes. The first victim had minor strength enhancement. The second had a strength quirk. The third is a mutation that allows incredible strength due to the nature of it. The next has a Stuckton quirk, but as you can see here, it notes that he feeds on their energy, making him more physically capable. The fifth has a fire quirk, but it has an added mutation in his hands, making them stronger to withstand direct heat. The last is more complicated, because it's a floating flight quirk. She would otherwise not count as a strength enhancer for me, but it's part of the description that her knees seem to be enhanced so she can handle rough landings after her flights. Izuku circled things and underlined sentences as he worked, the 3 people in the room nodding and paying close attention. That's a reasonable conclusion. One said thoughtfully. Izuku shrugged. Not very helpful though. We don't know why the killer is doing it, and we have no way of guessing who or where they'll strike next. Izuku tapped the pen against his chin, frowning. What's the calling card? He leaves a symbol written in the victim's blood after he kills them. Izuku was handed another folder, this one full of scene pictures instead of just profiles. He examined the mark, a U with a little Z in the center, inside a star. He doesn't kill in any particular way, as you can see. One of the officers frowned. Each kill is slightly different. All with sharp objects, but one looks like it was done with a butcher's knife, another like a jagged pipe, and one like clean-cut katanas. The markings are different. Izuku said suddenly, eyes widening. He slid the photos of the close-up shots out of the folder and placed them at the center of the meeting table. See? This one was drawn perfectly, straight lines and crisp edges. The next one is sloppy, almost an afterthought. This one is the exact same as the first. The fourth only has 4 points on it, instead of a 5-pointed star. The fifth is the same as the second, and the last one is different still. It's a group, not an individual killer. Izuku announced, pointing with wide eyes. Jesus! How did we miss that? One exclaimed, leaning over the table a little angrily. We glossed over them. Another frowned. We checked that they sort of matched and didn't think more of it. Midoriya, can you take on another group case? Izuku looked up to see 3 sets of serious eyes, and Izuku sighed. Probably not. I have 3 open group killer cases and 2 single murder cases. That's also not counting the Night Stalker. Can you do this one without me? Izuku eyes them all one at a time. If I need to, I'll pass one of my single murder cases to someone else to take this. We can do it, Midoriya. One said, determined. If it gets out of hand, we can talk about switching some of your cases around. Another agreed as she smiled at him. Thanks for your help, it's great you know your limits. Izuku nodded as he received a thumbs up. Alright, best of luck. They all nodded, and Izuku slipped out to return to his desk. He pulled out his files for his single cases and began going over the evidence again, looking for new clues. An investigator's work is never done. I'm headed out. Izuku waved to Jizuno as he signed the checkout sheet. She waved, and Izuku shrugged on his jacket. He'd already left his vest back at his desk. Bye, Midoriya. Are you off tomorrow? Izuku nodded as he shouldered his bag. Yeah, I'm spending the day with my mom. I even got off duty in the healer's center. I'll still be on call though. Izuku waved back as he headed out the front, already knowing the walk by heart. Izuku headed for the small place he always picked up lunch on Saturdays, and usually Sundays, and pulled out his personal cell. Izuku, hospital visit go okay? Katsuki, it was fine, broccoli. Doctors put me on some shitty antibiotics. Izuku, so you did have sludge knocking around in there. Sorry to hear. Katsuki, fucker. Don't act like you didn't know. Izuku, I'm not denying it, just empathizing. Katsuki, dumb broccoli. Any new cases from your job shift? Izuku, one, but I had to turn it down. I don't have the time for another full group killer case right now. Katsuki, just catch the BS artist. Then you'll have more time. Izuku, very funny. Izuku blinked in surprise as Katsuki called him, and then smiled fondly. This is Broccoli speaking. Izuku grinned into his phone. D-men right it is. Katsuki said in Izuku's ear. How are things with your jobs? Izuku hummed as he hopped over a crack in the sidewalk. Pretty good, actually. Saving a lot of people, catching the bad guys, you know. Izuku said. Katsuki grumbled non-committally, and Izuku laughed. What, you don't agree? I'll do better once I'm a hero. Of course, Kit Kat, I don't expect any less. Izuku grinned. How's the parents? Hag is fine, worried up a storm when she showed her but up at the hospital. Izuku huffed a laugh. Of course she did. The old man is happy as ever. The clothing company made a huge sale yesterday, coincidentally. Katsuki tried not to sound proud of his parents, and failed. I'm glad. Izuku grinned. How's Auntie? Katsuki asked nonchalantly. Mom's good. Izuku hummed. She's been having a few rough shifts but it's not too bad. I've got her. Broccoli looking but taking care of everyone else. Katsuki muttered. You're doing okay though, Izuku? Yeah, I'm good. He smiled. Sunlight has been happy. Lately. Fucker better be. Katsuki answered. I'll murder it otherwise. Izuku laughed. Oh, you will you? Katsuki huffed in his ear. How will you murder my quirk and not me, huh? I'll find a way if it misbehaves. Mark my words. Sure, Kat. Izuku chuckled. I'm coming up on the cafe. I'll see you at school Monday? Yeah. Hag tried to get me to skip, but I'm not weak enough to let one shitty villain get the better of me. Bye, Katsuki. Izuku rolled his eyes fondly. Bye, Broccoli. The call dropped, and Izuku smiled softly as he tucked his phone away. Pain in the butt for sure, but Katsuki really was Izuku's best friend. Izuku pushed the door of the little cafe open, smiling into the warm air. He'd been coming to the Hit It Off cafe since he had begun taking shifts at both of his jobs in one day, when he was around 11 or 12. The place was smack in the middle of his route from one building to the other. The bell jingled as Izuku entered, weaving his way between tables to the counter. Someone new was working, and he seemed to be staring at Izuku in shock for some reason. Order for Midoriya, please. Izuku said lightly. The boy blinked tiredly and frowned. Did you order with your phone? Izuku grinned. Nope. Is Kiko in? The boy looked surprised but couldn't respond before Kiko did. Izuku, I have your usual right here. The pink-haired girl rushed forward, white takeout bag in hand. Thanks, Kiko. Izuku took it and rummaged in his pocket for the exact amount of money he'd memorized months ago. Here. He handed it over and she didn't even check it before shoving it in the cash register and beaming at him. Did you have a good shift? She asked, leaning excitedly over the counter. Izuku rolled his eyes. Sort of. I had to turn down a case. I'm loaded right now. She gave him a sympathetic smile. When do you get off? Izuku hummed. I get off the center at 6, but if there's an emergency I'll be out with the medic squad a few extra hours probably. You're Midoriya Izuku. The tired boy finally blurted. Izuku turned his eyes to the boy and nodded. That's me. Izuku tilted his head, examining the boy. Purple hair and eyes, white pupils, under-eye hereditary discoloration mutation, mild to lean build, insomnia, assumed mental quirk. I haven't met you before, and you're new enough, hired in the past 4 days, so you didn't know I came here every weekend with the exact same order. The boy's eyes had gotten steadily wider and wider, and Izuku sighed. You must have seen me on TV yesterday then. Am I right? The boy just stood there, gaping slightly. Izuku's a police investigator. Kiko giggled behind a hand. I thought you were a healer. The boy blinked, uncertain. I am. Izuku confirmed. I have a healer license, as well as a police investigation license, and a whole ton of other stuff. Izuku shrugged. I've been working both jobs for years. Izuku checked his watch and frowned. Thanks for the food, I have to go. Izuku jogged out, waving to a few regulars who knew him, and left the place. He started down the street, only to pause. Midoriya. He turned to see the purple boy standing at the entrance to the cafe, staring after Izuku with huge eyes. I need to ask you something? It came out almost as a question, and Izuku walked over with his head tilted. What's up? The boy swallowed heavily. Did you mean it? Izuku frowned in confusion. You said anyone could be a hero, no matter what their quirk was. Did you mean it? Of course I did. Izuku said, waving a hand in dismissal. Being a hero is a choice, not something you're born to be, or something you have, like a quirk. It's an attitude, a dream, something that is hard work and will challenge you every day for the rest of your life. The boy fidgeted, a hand rubbing the back of his neck. My quirk, it's mental, like you said. What should I do? I want to go to UA. He trailed off, and Izuku nodded in understanding. You believe you'll be unable to pass the extremely physically biased entrance exam, right? Izuku raised an eyebrow and the boy nodded. I'd recommend getting stronger. You're tall, but you look like you spend more time trying to sleep and less time running. Basic defense is good too, and see if you can learn how to use a weapon and bring it to the exam. Support items are allowed, and in the orientation speech they even say you're allowed to bring anything. Okay. Strength training, weapons, and defense. The boy repeated, determined frown in place. Hey, what's your name? Izuku asked. The boy looked up. Shinso. The boy said, purple eyes narrowed. Well, Shinso, I'm looking forward to seeing you become a hero. Izuku then turned around and started jogging towards the healer center once again. He had 3 minutes to go the last 10 minutes of his usual casual walking trip if he was going to make it at his usual arrival. Well, time to figure out how long it took while running. Izuku took off down the streets, not flat-out sprinting, but it wasn't a soft jog either. His heart pounded and his backpack slammed into his back with each step, but Izuku grinned at the feeling. He raced down the roads and around corners, eyes ever alert and watchful as he went. Grinning, he slid the door open and waved at the front desk lady. You're 2 minutes later than usual. She eyed him as he took several deep breaths to calm his heartbeat. DMN, 10-minute walk, 5-minute run. He wasn't late, it was a 20-minute walk at his usual speed, and his shift didn't start until a half hour later. He'd shown up later than he usually did, obviously. Shinso really held him up. Worth it. I got sidetracked. Izuku nodded to her as he signed the check-in sheet, and then headed over to the cafeteria so he could finally eat his lunch. He slid into his usual booth that was always invaded sooner or later by annoying medics, and started eating his sandwich. Midoriya. There they were. What kept you? You're usually earlier. Did you catch a villain on your way over? Izuku sighed as the three people slid into the booth across the table from him. I was talking to someone who wanted advice. Got held up. Izuku said between bites. Anything new? Nope, my shift was really quiet. Huali smiled at him, tiny rows of fish teeth on display. I only had 3 patients, and they barely needed treatment. Lucky. Sakura whined, throwing himself into the table dramatically. Carefully as well, though, because he didn't want to impale Izuku's sandwich with his green devil horns. There was a bus accident last night, so as soon as I checked in they sent me over to the hospital to help stabilize the patients. My mom helped with that accident. Izuku hummed. She said some of the injuries were quite bad. Seriously? The dark-haired medic named Jisho exclaimed. I thought he was being dramatic as usual. Sakura threw up his hands, dramatically. I was not. He yelled. See? Midoriya believes me. He gestured extravagantly to Izuku, who raised an eyebrow. I don't even know what you claim to have done. I merely added in what my mother told me this morning at 3. Izuku finished his sandwich and began putting his trash back in the takeout bag so he could toss the whole thing. Midoriya. The betrayal. Sakura placed a hand on his heart and swooned into Huali, who giggled. I gotta go, have a good rest of the day. Izuku waved as he went to throw the bag of trash away, a little glad they all worked mornings. They could be excitable. Izuku went to the bathroom and washed up after eating, and then headed up to the clinic. He decided on the elevator, just for fun. He usually didn't, but Izuku liked to spice things up. The doors slid open to the 4th floor, and Izuku stepped out as the smell of powerful antiseptic burned his nose. He walked along the left wall to retrieve his healer uniform from his cubby, and then headed to the locker room. Healer uniforms were more personalized than the standard medic uniforms, but not a lot, so they were always identifiable as healers. Medic uniforms were white and blue, tough pants and lighter shirts, red pockets on the thighs with a red medical belt, and the staff of Asclepius down their spine. Izuku's healer center uniform was the same style, the pants being identical but the rest of it was different. Field healers wore gold stripes down every seam of their uniform shirts, easily visible. The rest of Izuku's shirt was a tough white material, and he wore a lightweight bulletproof vest over it with gold trim. He had a tinted visor to protect his eyes, as well as a face mask to cover his mouth. He only wore those during fieldwork, though. Pulling on the pants and shirt, he clipped the belt on next before pulling on medical gloves that were required all throughout the clinic floors. Izuku tucked his normal clothes, vest, visor, and mask all into his locker and turned the key. Making sure it was locked tight, he tucked the key into a thigh pocket and headed out of the locker room. It was time to start his shift. Tough life, again. Izuku walked all the way down the center aisle of the massive clinic room on floor 4. A few people nodding to him as he walked by in his healer uniform. There were 5 aisles to walk down and many, many rows. There were roughly 120 beds in the large room, each behind thin, gray, 3-walled privacy screens. Izuku ignored the screens and the unhappy sounds of crying and pain, heading right to the very back of the room where the main desk was. Healer 177908, Midoriya, reporting in for the afternoon shift. He said blankly to the man at the desk. Izuku had never asked for his name, oddly enough. The healer world was very different than the police world, though. Healer 177908, checked in, head to your supervisor for instructions. The man said as always. Izuku nodded and headed to the left, a small office where the head healer was. Just because Izuku technically outranked her as a healer, doesn't mean he was the boss. She ran the whole floor, and Izuku accepted that easily. The door was open, so Izuku simply stood in the doorway until she turned to face him. Midoriya, good to see you. They nodded to each other. We have 3 patients for you to see right now, treat them however you see fit. Thank you, head healer. Izuku bowed slightly before she stood and handed him a clipboard. Bed 18, bed 90, and bed in that order, Midoriya. Her eyes were steely and he nodded. When he was younger, he'd go in number order instead of what his instructor ordered. They still needled him about it even years later. Yes, sir. Izuku nodded and strode off, clipboard in hand. He headed for bed 18 and found a 7-year-old lying prone and lifeless, a woman who he assumed to be her mother clutching her hand. Hello. I'm Healer Midoriya. Can you tell me what happened, miss? The woman turned red-rimmed eyes to him. I'm Ms. Jirua. We were in a car accident, and Kihono was thrown out of the car. Jirua took a shaking breath. She must have taken her seatbelt off. She rolled along the concrete, and we were all taken to the hospital. It didn't save my fiancé. I was healed completely, and so was Kihono, but she hasn't woken up. What were her injuries? Izuku asked clinically. Do you have a report I could see? She wordlessly opened her purse and handed him a medical sheet. Izuku looked at it and nearly winced. Yeesh, the kid was lucky to be alive. All the skin on her arms and face had been raw and almost completely ripped off from rolling across the pavement. Several breaks in her arms and ribs, and a heavy concussion, both wrists were broken. Mild injuries to her legs, nothing terrible there. They administered a skin regrowth quirk with antibiotics to prevent the growth of infected skin, as well as a regular healing quirk used every day for 3 days to heal the fractures and breaks. It had been a week since the accident, no sign of consciousness. She'd been transferred to the healer's center because they didn't know what was causing the coma. I'd like to examine her, if that's all right. The woman nodded and moved away from her daughter so Izuku could approach. She looked pale, and her eyes were still under her eyelids, no sign of REM. Her pulse was steady, and when he checked her blood pressure it was a little high but nothing too bad. Her head wasn't bleeding outwardly, but there was bruising behind one of her ears and minor swelling. Izuku frowned at the spot. Is everything okay? Jirua asked, biting her nails. Izuku turned to face her fully. Do I have permission to use my quirk? Izuku asked seriously. As a licensed healer, I don't really have to ask, but it is polite. She hesitated, but she nodded firmly. Thank you. He pulled off his gloves, threw them out, and rubbed hand sanitizer into them thoroughly. Turning back to his patient, Izuku let sunlight pool into his left hand, making his palm glow faintly. He pressed the soft golden glow into the side of her head and shut his eyes. Izuku was extremely careful as he let sunlight leak from his hand into the girl's head and found the problem. She had a small bleed in her brain, causing mild swelling. The hospital must have neglected a CT scan, which would have picked up on it. Sunlight swirled around the bleed and the extra blood, and soaked in so the patient could absorb the light. Sunlight purified her injuries, and Kihono's eyes fluttered slightly, her breathing catching. The woman behind Izuku gasped, but didn't move a muscle. Hello, Kihono. If you can hear me, please give me a sign. A smile will do. She raised tired green eyes to his gold ones, and she smiled. Good. You've been asleep for about 10 days, so you're very weak right now. You can go back to sleep if you want. I'll go fetch a medic to get you ready to discharge. She nodded sluggishly, but her eyes held awareness, so Izuku pulled away and turned towards the mother. Miss Jirua, your daughter had a minor brain bleed that I have purged. The doctor did not order a CT scan, which in future would be a good idea. Excuse me. Izuku turned away, before pausing as she responded. Your quirk. She whispered. Izuku looked over his shoulder, eyes still a bright gold. She seemed to collect herself, clearly eyeing the few strands of dull gold in his hair and his eyes. Thank you for whatever you did. Izuku gave her his healer smile, a soothing one where he showed his dimples. The smile people sighed in relief when they received it. It was my pleasure. He then walked firmly away and raised a hand towards the medic walking by. Bed 18 is good to go. Minor brain bleed causing a 10-day coma, all other injuries treated in the hospital. Brain and skull are clean and healed, good for discharge. The medic nodded. I'll pop over, but I have another patient to handle first. She said, smile tight. No worries. She can wait, the girl is in perfect health now. Some of the tension seemed to bleed from the medic's shoulders, and she nodded again. Good to know. Thanks, Midoriya. He gave her a sharp nod before walking down the many rows of beds in search of bed. He spotted it, entered the privacy screen, and saw two men standing next to another man who lay on the bed with a slightly bloody sheet over his lower body. Hello, I am Healer Midoriya, Izuku said as he approached. All of the men were over 30, and they looked at him cautiously. Can you inform me of the situation? He was working on the roof, and he fell while on the ladder. One said, eyes assessing Izuku. He hit the barn nearby, legs going clean through the roof of it. Ambulance took us right here, and we've been waiting about 5 minutes. The medic numbed his pain, but... Izuku nodded sharply. I'll get right to work. I need space, so please move back. Izuku pulled a new pair of gloves from a belt pouch, pulled them on, and moved towards the patient. Izuku left the top of the sheet around the man's waist, but he pulled it up to uncover up to his knees. Izuku blinked at the horrific sight. The bones in his legs had been shattered, jagged bone shards peeking out of his body in the complete wrong directions, and his ankles were dangling uselessly, all muscles and nerves disconnected. Izuku examined it more closely. No arteries had been severed by bone shards, there wasn't enough blood. There'd probably be more, but no one had touched the exposed bones that were mostly stemming the bleeding. It could have been much worse, Izuku realized. Izuku turned to the three men calmly. Trash can and barf bags on your left, please, he said as one was turning pale in the face. Do I have permission to administer my quirk? Asking isn't required, but it's polite. Yeah, just heal him, one said shakily as the pale one leaned over to throw up in the trash can. Izuku turned back to his patient, repeating the process of removing his gloves and sanitizing. He pulled sunlight into his hand once again, soft light emitting from his left palm. Izuku cupped underneath one of the man's mangled knees and shut his eyes. Pressing sunlight into the man, he felt it swirl downwards to his foot, and then up and over to his other leg. Sunlight filled the man's veins, drifting across bone shards and caressing snapped muscles. Izuku inhaled deeply, and then exhaled, letting the sunlight absorb and knit and swirl and fix. There was enough sunlight in the man's legs that they glowed faintly as the sunlight flowed through his veins and soothed all pain and injuries. Satisfied, Izuku let go. He's been completely healed, Izuku reported. Tell him to have plenty of water and rest. His muscles are new and aren't to be strained. Izuku put in a mild glare at the final words. An order, not a recommendation. They all nodded, staring at his hair. You know, it looks as if someone with paint on their hands ran it through your curls, don't you? One man said, pointing vaguely. It was probably true, larger strands had probably been consumed by sunlight than the few from before. Izuku didn't have to worry unless all of it turned the dull metallic gold color. Although, he'd have passed out by then, so it wasn't really the goal to get that far. I'm aware, Izuku confirmed. He then headed away and snagged a medic that was leaning against a wall. Bed 90 ready for discharge. I healed major trauma to his legs, multiple open fractures and torn muscles. He needs rest, possibility of weakness after treatment. The medic pushed off the wall. Understood. Thank you for your hard work, Midoriya. Honestly, dunno what we'd do without you. Izuku nodded to him before heading off towards bed. Once he was done with bed 74, he'd need to check in with the head healer and file his reports, and if there was still time in his shift he would get a few more patients in. I'm Healer Midoriya, what can I do for you today? Izuku said to the patient who was seated on the bed. She looked okay, sitting up, but she didn't respond to his voice behind her. He entered her field of vision, waved, and started to sign. I'm Healer Midoriya, as I said. Can you hear things at the moment? She sighed, and smiled apologetically. No, I'm deaf. Thank goodness someone speaks sign language here. Izuku gave her a healer smile. Don't worry, I'll handle everything. Can you tell me what brings you here today? Izuku took a seat so he could be more at her level as they signed. About a month ago, I was injured during a cheer practice. I'm a cheerleader. Izuku nodded for her to continue. Anyway, I injured my back, and when I went to the hospital they said it was probably a sprain. I waited a week and then went back to practice, but the pain didn't get better. Sort of brushed it off, but this morning, she paused in her signing and sighed loudly. This morning I woke up and I can't feel my legs. I called the healer center and was brought here because a normal hospital doesn't really fix paralyzation. She set her hands down on her lap and looked as if she wanted to hide her face but couldn't because she needed to see Izuku's response. I understand. The best thing I can guess is that you herniated a disc in your lower spine, lumbar or sacral, and it shifted during your continued exercise to damage your spinal cord. Understand? She nodded, eyes getting shiny. Normally, before this happens, you can seek treatment through medication, physical rehabilitation therapy, or even surgery. However, at this stage, a healing quirk is your best option. It's good you came today. May I use my quirk on you? She nodded immediately, ignoring the few tears that slipped from her eyes, and Izuku stood with a nod. He gently helped her lie down on her stomach, and then he removed his gloves and sanitized to once again use his quirk, sunlight. Pooling the light in his hand once more, he pressed his left palm into her back. Sunlight found the injury, swirling around it and softly touching the damage. Izuku let the heat and energy melt into it, shutting his eyes and letting the light leak from him to her. It took much less work than the roof injury guy, which was immensely relieving to Izuku. He didn't want to risk overheating and getting a fever. Izuku opened his eyes and removed his hand. He put on new gloves and moved to the end of the table to be in the patient's line of sight. She looked at him, eyes wide. I'm going to see if you can feel my touch, so I'll gently probe your ankles and legs, and you need to raise an arm for me if you can feel it. Understand? She nodded, and Izuku went back. He pressed his fingers into the ball of her left foot, and she lifted her left arm. He repeated the action with her right, and she raised her right hand. Izuku sighed in relief. He didn't doubt his quirk, but he wasn't cocky enough to ignore double-checking. Izuku moved to crouch once again where she could see him. I'd like you to sit up now, without assistance. She nodded, eyes determined. She slowly sat up, swinging her legs to dangle off the side of the bed. She beamed at him, wiggling her toes. Izuku smiled his healer smile and nodded in approval. I'll bring someone over to discharge you. Take it easy. I'd recommend not going back to cheer for at least 3 months, plus going to physical therapy. The injury is healed, but your back needs time to recover. Understand? She nodded vehemently. I'm not making the same mistake twice. Izuku nodded in approval once more, and waved as he left. Hey, are you done with bed 90? Izuku asked as he noticed the same guy as before walking down the aisle. Yep. You got another. Izuku nodded. Bet she's deaf, and I healed her spinal herniation with partial paraplegia. The medic sighed. Man, I really need to get around to learning sign. I swear, I keep saying I'll do it next month. The man left, muttering, and Izuku smirked after him, amused. Walking down the aisle and weaving through the rows towards the head healer's office, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. It was probably close to halfway gold, which wasn't terrible so long as he was careful. Izuku stood in the doorway, and she turned to him expectantly. Bed 18, a girl with a minor brain bleed. Bed 90, a man with major trauma to his lower extremities with multiple open fractures and torn muscles. Bed 74, a woman with a spinal injury. Izuku reported. All healed, bed 90 and 74 both with recommended rest after healing. She nodded firmly. File it and then, her phone went off. Her emergency phone. Change of plan. She said as she picked up the phone. Head healer Kunchku, identification 499087 of floor 4. She didn't move, eyes serious as whoever was on the other side of the phone spoke, most likely explaining the situation and asking for healers. She nodded firmly. Understood. Yeah, roughly 17 minutes. She hung up. Situation. Izuku asked as she stood up. Get in your full gear. I'm going, you're going, and we're snagging the first medic we see. Head healer Kunchku ordered. He'd never actually known her name before. There's been an attack involving Endeavor against a villain who has some sort of gas quirk. They estimate about 25 injured and more to come. Tell someone to grab me an ice pack and meet us in the garage. I'll suit up and head down, Izuku said shortly. Who's in command for this mission? She gave him a scrutinizing look before sighing. You're more qualified for emergencies. You're in command, I'll be your second. Izuku nodded as they neared the locker room and he split off. Understood. I'll meet you downstairs in 2 minutes. Izuku took out his key and calmly and efficiently opened his locker and removed his gear. He pulled on his bulletproof vest as well as settled his visor around his head and the black mask over his mouth. He locked it again, due to his personal items still being inside, and then strode out of the room. Izuku didn't bother with the elevator, taking the stairs at a brisk pace but not a run. Wasting energy on running during an emergency was stupid when you could just calmly jog or walk briskly. He arrived on the garage level and a girl was standing there, ice pack in hand. Thank you. Izuku took it, nodded to her. Sunlight wasn't really giving him a fever yet, but the ice would help stave off the fever he'll inevitably get. In theory. He headed for the ambulance that was lit. Izuku climbed into the passenger seat, Kunchika behind the wheel and the male medic from before in the back part of the ambulance. Let's move, Izuku said calmly. Kunchika took off down the street, out of the garage. Izuku removed his visor so he could press the ice to his forehead. Everyone, sound off with identification numbers and ranks. Head Healer Kunchika, identification 499087, rank C. Medic Kato, number 8907, rank 3. Healer Midoriya, number 177908, rank A. Izuku nodded firmly. Do we have an active location? During the call they were between XXX and XXX, moving southward. Izuku nodded. Head directly to the place you were given. The roughly 25 victims called in during the start of the attack should still be there. He received 2 nods of understanding, and Izuku fell silent as he watched the road zip by, people moving out of the way of the sirens and flashing lights. Smoke there. Izuku pointed. About a dozen. Buildings ahead, an entire block was full of smoke, massive clouds heading up. I'm calling for more medics, Izuku said, pulling out his work phone. Understood, Kunchika said as she wove between cars. Izuku rang the front desk of the center, the second number. Identification number and rank? The girl said seriously. 177908, rank A. We need immediate backup on XXX of XXX. My team and I are still en route and we see smoke pouring out of at least 9 buildings. We need a team of a dozen medics here as soon as possible. Reports say the situation is active with Endeavor on the scene. Izuku said firmly, clearly, and quickly. Understood, Midoriya. We'll send 2 teams of 6 to be arriving in roughly 10 minutes. She said, clearly already moving into action. Good. Send them in full field medic gear. This is an active scene. Izuku then hung up and shoved his phone into his belt. He removed the ice, slipped on his visor, and watched Kunchika take one last turn and come to a stop, leaving the sirens on. Everyone out, Medic Kato. Make a safe zone for us to leave victims for you to check over. Healer Kunchika, rescue and retrieve. Yes, sir. They chorused and then they leapt into action. Healers on the scene. Izuku yelled as he exited the vehicle. Victims who can walk, come this way. People started cheering in relief, several people covered in ash limping over. Izuku jogged from person to person, asking if they needed immediate help, but none did. He directed them toward the safe zone Kato was setting up, and Kunchika was starting to round up people who had collapsed or were struggling to walk. Izuku headed into one of the burning buildings, eyes searching for people. Healer in the building. Is anyone here? Izuku heard a few groans and he went for the sounds. A wall had collapsed, and several people were hiding under a table, nearly crushed by the wall. Without the table, they'd have died instantly rather than be sort of squished. Stay calm, I'm going to get you out. Izuku held out a hand and helped pull a woman out first, her whimpering as one of her legs seemed to be twisted. Correction, dislocation in the knee. Izuku then helped a man who seemed okay, mildly favoring his left hand as he gently cradled the other. Last was another woman who was coughing badly, but otherwise unharmed. "This way, hurry," Izuku ordered as he scooped the first woman into his arms. He led them out of the building and handed the woman to a medic, nearly sagging in relief as he saw both medic teams had arrived. Izuku searched the whole building, only one other person having been inside. Escorting them out, Izuku moved to the next building. Building by building, Izuku searched for survivors, counting the people who were already gone as he went. However, he wasn't ready for the fight to head straight for Izuku and the medic zone. The villain was running, a green gas pouring from his hands as he went, a crazed grin on his face. His pupils were heavily dilated, and Izuku figured he was probably high. But those eyes were trained right on the group of survivors. Izuku ran, flat out sprinting for the group, and stood protectively in front of them. He would protect them, and sunlight would answer. The villain made eye contact with him as Izuku crossed his arms in front of his face and stared the villain down. "Oh, a healer. My lucky day," the villain yelled as he charged down the street. "If I'm going to Tartarus anyway, I'm taking out as many people as I can along the way," he screamed. Izuku shut his eyes and pushed sunlight out of his crossed arms. Sunlight lived inside him, Izuku knew. It made a home there, flowing through his veins and seeping into his tissues, and usable in many ways. So Izuku poured his sunlight into his arms, and it grew, moving to help fuel his desire to protect. A brilliant shield 20 feet high and 15 feet wide, made of pure blinding sunlight, formed in front of the medic zone. Izuku held it in place, gritting his teeth as his outer forearms slowly became as metallic and dull as gold. "What is this?" the villain shrieked. "This is the power of sunlight, a-hole. Leave my patients alone," Izuku screamed in response. Now, Izuku couldn't see past the shield, but he seriously hoped the villain wouldn't attack it. He'd lose whatever body part tried to touch it. Agonized screams and sizzling proved that, yeah, the villain had touched the shield. The gold crept down towards Izuku's wrists, spreading and wrapping around his arms, and Izuku glared in determination. "It's Endeavor!" someone cried. "He's caught the villain!" another one yelled, pumping a fist. Izuku uncrossed his arms, gasping, and let the sunlight shield fade into just golden flickers hanging in the air. Izuku examined his arms, a little relieved it had only covered from elbow to wrists. He could still use his hands, and sort of bend his elbows. Izuku had no feeling in the gold sections, but he'd protected everyone. He spun around, panicking lightly. "Was anyone hurt just now?" Izuku yelled to the group. "Specifically from the shield, or from the near attack just now?" The closer people shook their heads, while he heard several reassurances that they were fine. Izuku grinned in relief, and then turned to see Endeavor was indeed glaring at the nearby press, unconscious and handcuffed villain in hand. Both arms were badly burned, and the villain was missing a hand, the stump cauterized well but also blackened. "Oops." Izuku turned back to face the medics that were gathered. "Medics?" Healer Midoriya speaking, identification number 177908, rank A. Izuku called. "I need rescue and retrieval inside the buildings down the left side. The attack is over, but the crisis is not." He didn't look to see if they nodded before he turned to face the police squads holding back the bystanders. "Under the authority of Investigator Midoriya of the Musutafu Prefecture, I need half a dozen officers to retrieve the dead from the buildings on the right. I'd already cleared those buildings of living victims." People started moving immediately, and Izuku turned back to the few medics who'd stayed to help treat the victims. "I'll be helping load patients into ambulances. If you need immediate help, let me know. My quirk is only for emergencies." Izuku worked into the night, administering first aid, loading patients into ambulances, setting up lights for the medics in the safe zone, and he only needed to heal 2 people with sunlight. By the time the fires were all out, the injured and dead were all counted, and Izuku was told he could head to the center to end his shift. He was positively dead on his feet. He dutifully helped file a crisis incident report with a group of 5 medics plus head healer Kunjiku, and then hit the showers. As he watched the blood and dirt go down the drain, Izuku leaned his slightly burning forehead on the cold wall of the shower and let himself relax under the water. It wasn't warm, not really. He couldn't risk overheating himself after using sunlight over and over. However, the cold soothed his overworked muscles as well as helped make him more alert. Putting on scrubs temporarily, he dropped his dirted healer uniform in the laundry bin to be washed and headed to floor 4 to retrieve his clothes. Dressed, showered, and exiting the building, Izuku tilted his head back and sighed. He sat down on the bench outside, and he pulled out his personal cell. He waited as it rang, and smiled when he heard his mother's voice. "Are you done with the paperwork, Izuku? I saw the TV rerun." She asked softly. "Yeah. Can you pick me up?" He leaned his head against the wall behind the bench. "Oh sunshine, you sound exhausted," she said, and he heard her rummaging around, probably getting ready to leave the house and retrieve him. "You did wonderful, Izuku. You saved so many lives and I'm so proud of you." Izuku smiled into his phone. "Thanks, Mom," he murmured. They talked quietly as she drove, Izuku admitting to the inevitable loss of life during the emergency. A healer couldn't save everyone, and neither could heroes. She didn't try to tell him it was okay, because it wasn't. Those people were gone, and they'd always be gone. She did, however, remind him that he did his best, and that was enough. "Izuku." He opened his eyes, hearing his name both through the phone and in real life, and he lifted his head from where he'd let it fall against the wall. "Sorry, Mom, I guess I'm tired enough. My situational awareness totally screwed off," Izuku said apologetically. "You mean, screwed up?" she asked as he stood, examining his near completely dull golden hair and his solid gold arms. "No, I mean screwed off." Izuku gave her a tired grin. "The other way I could say it isn't very nice." She gave him a disapproving look, her lip wobbling with repressed laughter, and Izuku huffed in amusement. "Come on, let's get you home," she said fondly. Izuku loved his mother and he loved his jobs, but man was his life exhausting. Second best. Izuku swung his leg off his bike, yawning, blinking tiredly and glaring into the sunrise as if it stole his firstborn child. It was 4 in the morning and he was meant to be at school by 8, because classes started a half hour after that. Fantastic. Izuku had purposefully asked for the graveyard shift on Wednesdays so he'd be closer to the Night Stalker case, but knowing that didn't make school the next morning any easier. It still SCD and made him want to faceplant into next week. Izuku unlocked and opened the door to his apartment quietly, knowing his mom wouldn't be up for another 2 hours, and Izuku carefully removed his shoes, coat, and bag, before padding on quiet feet to his bedroom. Upon making it to said bedroom, he changed into pajamas and immediately collapsed into bed. Izuku was going to murder his alarm clock. Correction, Izuku was going to murder his alarm clock after he avoided being late to school. Izuku blearily stumbled around, throwing clothes everywhere as he tried to find his uniform and yank it on without bothering to use him routine. He grabbed an apple and a granola bar on his way out, barely stuffing his feet in shoes and throwing on his leather jacket before stumbling outside. The cold air was a wake-up call, hallelujah, and Izuku wasn't squinting into the light by the time he was hopping on his motorcycle and speeding away toward school. He'd never ridden it to school before, and Izuku was a little nervous about parking it there. Instead, he parked it in a garage 3 blocks down, and sprinted the rest of the way as he tried to shove his jacket into his backpack roughly. It wasn't really working, but it was the effort that counted, right? Izuku skidded to a stop in front of his classroom and took a deep breath, calming his heart rate, and then entered right as the bell rang. He waved to his teacher, who smiled at him, and Izuku took his seat. He was 1 desk over and 1 row behind Katsuki, who was staring at him like Izuku was an idiot. He probably was trying to make graveyard and school work. Izuku gave him an apologetic shrug as he plopped down and started pulling out his things. He had work to do, after all. When it was time for lunch, Izuku didn't feel like moving his head from where it lay on the desk. Unfortunately, he didn't have much choice since Katsuki existed. "Oi, broccoli, wake up." He ruffled Izuku's fluffy hair roughly. "I'm awake, Katsuki." Izuku muttered. "Believe me, I wish I wasn't." Katsuki laughed. "Get your butt up, I don't care if you worked graveyard last night, it's time for lunch." Izuku did as he was told, but he angrily muttered some very unkind things under his breath. Katsuki just laughed. Izuku hated how people waved as he went by, smiling and chatting as if they knew him. As if they were friends. He glared at them lightly, sometimes they took the hint and backed off, but most of the time they weren't put off enough. Because Izuku's luck is oh so lovely, it was a day they elected to ignore his glare and tried to follow him as he walked around with his lunch tray. As he left the lunchroom completely, they started looking a little annoyed, and when he exited the building they finally gave up. Izuku sighed in relief as he sat on the end of the koi pond, settling his tray on his lap. He smiled as he realized Katsuki was approaching, but said nothing as the boy sat next to him with his usual angry scowl. "You didn't answer," Katsuki said finally. "Answer what?" "The sludge day, a few months ago." Izuku straightened, eyes boring into Katsuki as the boy picked at his food. "I told those extras I was headed to UA, and our shitty teacher asked if you were too." Katsuki looked up, glaring, right at Izuku. "You didn't FING answer him." "I don't know if I have the answer he would want, or the one you want." Izuku sighed. "I don't understand why you don't just become a hero." Katsuki grumbled. "Obviously a shitty broccoli like you would just be some nobody hero, but you'd be a hero." "I don't know if I want to be a hero," Izuku admitted, tilting his head back so his face was in the sun as he shut his eyes. "I'm happy with the 2 jobs I have already. How would I ever fit hero school into that? I'd have to give something up." Katsuki growled, clenching and unclenching his fists. "Just stop the shitty healer center." Katsuki bit out angrily. "You never wanted to work there anyway, shitty broccoli." Izuku smiled slightly. "I know," he admitted. "But I'm happy with what I have. Isn't that enough?" Katsuki didn't say anything, so Izuku waited. The sun on his face and freckles made sunlight curl with happiness, swishing inside Izuku and bubbling at the surface. Izuku knew it was sort of sentient, but not quite. It played off his own emotions for the most part. It's why he couldn't ever lose control. Usually, however, the sunlight just sat under his skin and he could move it around his body without actually using his quirk. It was a part of him, after all. Sunlight moved, and Izuku let it curl into his hair as the wind ruffled it in the light breeze. Gold melted into his hair, he knew. Not the metallic color that consumed him when he used his quirk, harsh and deep with its gold. When Izuku moved the sunlight, his eyes flashed like liquid sunlight, bright and glowing. His hair was the same, curls lightening to an almost iridescent gold, a bright color full of life and light, glowing in the sun. He could have asked it not to move as such, keeping it more internal, but that didn't make sunlight happy. Izuku had no reason to deny it small things like changing his hair or eye color. Sometimes it even curled around his fingers, making his nails turn gold and fingers glow. He could do it purposefully, flashing his eyes gold to prove a point, using it to make his hair a beacon while working as a healer. Sunlight was always happiest when Izuku felt the sun on his skin, though. It answered his call better then too. "Hey, Goldilocks?" A soft voice came, interrupting his thoughts. Izuku hummed an acknowledgement. "Why would you settle for being happy where you are, when you could chase after a dream that thrills you?" Izuku opened his eyes as Katsuki stood and stalked off, hands in his pockets and slouching. Katsuki had spoken so softly. Izuku stared at what remained of his food. He couldn't find an answer, and he didn't know why that bothered him. For the rest of the school day, Katsuki completely ignored him, and Izuku thought that was fair. Izuku, on the other hand, was just repeating what he'd said in his head over and over. Why would you settle for being happy where you are, when you could chase after a dream that thrills you? Izuku leaned his chin on a hand as he stared out the window. Why would you settle, when you can chase after a dream that thrills you? Izuku didn't know, and that frustrated him. He wasn't settling, he was happy. He was. Whenever Izuku solved a case and watched a criminal or a villain get locked away, he found himself wanting to beam with pride. When he finished at a scene, healer gear dirty and well used, he knew his exhaustion was caused by saving people. He felt content, knowing he'd done his part and he'd saved people. But didn't heroes save people too? Izuku frowned as he sat through class after class and the day went by. No, heroes stopped villains. They saved people, sure, but not like healers, right? That one question, one single sentence, had destroyed what Izuku had thought was a perfectly reasonable view of his own life. Izuku was a healer, he saved people the heroes couldn't and healed people with a warm hand. Izuku was an investigator, he helped get criminals and villains off the streets. But, was that really what he was doing? Was he really saving people, or was he a second defense, saving people who the heroes had already let get injured? Was he catching bad guys, or was he just examining crimes that had already happened to prevent even more from happening? What if Izuku wanted to prevent people from being injured in the first place? What if Izuku wanted to stop the villain before he was looking at a wall of 16 murders and trying to guess who was next? What if he was settling for second best? Was he okay with that? Izuku didn't know, and he didn't like that. Izuku went into the precinct distracted, and it was obvious to everyone around him. He still did his work, still made his steamed hot chocolate, still made sure everything was going smoothly, but his mind kept wandering. They could see it in the way his eyes drifted, they could hear it in how his voice fluctuated on certain words, they could feel it when he finished a report and slumped in his chair silently. They knew. Izuku's shift was 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., which meant he could go straight home and to bed after since he was off work at the center. He had less than 10 minutes left, and was resisting banging his useless brain against his desk. He didn't know why what Katsuki said mattered so much. Sure, it was sentimental, unusual from Katsuki, but that shouldn't have made Izuku's brain stop working. Izuku turned abruptly, knowing something was approaching, and saw Eraserhead heading for his desk. Izuku sighed. Midoriya. Eraserhead nodded to him. You're off in a few. Yes. Izuku confirmed. What do you need? There've been 2 sightings of the Night Stalker, and I wanted to confirm with you if they're legitimate. Eraserhead said, handing Izuku a folder. Do you have work at the center after this? No. I'm off today, which is lucky. Means I'll actually get some sleep for once. Izuku said absent-mindedly as he opened the folder. There were blurry camera shots along with eyewitnesses' descriptions for each photo. Izuku started with the first one, taken from a convenience store security camera. The image was of a man in a black suit with armored reinforcements on his torso and thighs, and a black sort of helmet with curling ram horns on it. A gun was at his hip, and a hand was on it protectively. The eyewitness said he was running between alleys, keeping out of the light and in the shadows. The only reason they noticed him was because the witness had a hearing-type quirk. The second photo was of a man in a black suit with armored reinforcements on his chest and thighs, with a gun on his lower hip and his hands out in front of him. His helmet had curling ram horns on it near his ears. The photo was taken from a traffic light monitoring cam. The eyewitness said they spotted him walking down a dark street, almost shabbling. He moved slowly but every step was silent, and the witness hid inside a building immediately upon seeing him. The one from the convenience store shot is the copycat. Izuku said firmly, tapping the photo. Night Stalker doesn't try to hide other than being completely silent and blending into the already dark streets. He has no need of slinking from alley to alley. Beyond that, see how in the first photo the guy has his hand near the gun, while the second one has his hands loose and ready to attack at a moment's notice. The real one favors his quirk, while the copycat has to rely on his gun. Eraserhead nodded. Good catch. Izuku frowned at the paper. So we have proof that the real Night Stalker is still out there. Why would he need a copycat? Izuku frowned harder. Most copycats come from a villain's death or capture. This one just seems like he's doing it for fun or something. Pretending we know why a villain is doing something isn't rational. Eraserhead sighed. I know, but this guy isn't a villain yet. Izuku said, handing the folder back. We have no evidence he's used a quirk. That classifies him as a criminal, for now. We need more information, which absolutely SCKS because it probably means we have to wait until he's seen or kills again. Izuku's eyes drifted a little, uncertainty kicking in. There was the truth that Izuku couldn't go out on patrol like Eraserhead, looking actively for the villain and working his butt off to prevent more murders. No, he was benched and unable to actually save people. If anything, when he arrested criminals and villains, he was really just avenging already dead people. He was giving their souls peace, sure, but Midoriya. Yes. Izuku said immediately, eyes focusing. He knew he hadn't missed anything Eraserhead said, he wasn't that far gone. The man sighed. People have been saying you've been off all day. Like that? Eraserhead said bluntly. Something's on your mind. My best friend said something that's messing with my head. Izuku smiled apologetically. I'll get it sorted. It won't mess with my work, as you have already observed. I'm guessing seeing if I was capable despite my mild preoccupation was a secondary goal of this conversation with me? Izuku raised an eyebrow, and the hero eyed him. What did your friend say? Eraserhead pried. You're one of the best people in this station. Maybe even the best, despite your age. Being in top form is important. Izuku narrowed his eyes suspiciously, but then he sighed when the hero just stared blankly. He asked me why I wasn't going to be a hero, and I said I was content doing my police and healer work. Izuku admitted, leaning into his chair and tipping his head back to stare at the ceiling. He asked, why would you settle, when you can chase a dream that thrills you? I don't know why, but it's bothering me. Is being a hero a dream of yours then? Eraserhead asked. It used to be before I started really working as a healer. Izuku answered. But I thought I'd moved past it, accepting that my 2 jobs were enough. Realizing that I'd accepted it and moved past it, I started asking myself if I really was content as I thought I was. Izuku sat up and smiled at the hero apologetically, again. Don't worry, I'll figure it out. I think your friend is right. Izuku blinked. Settling for a life you ended up in instead of what you wanted will only become a regret once you've lived it for too many years. If you're truly happy with your life and willing to do this forever, then the thought of becoming a hero wouldn't be a conflicting or difficult thought. Eraserhead's dark eyes bore into Izuku's, which flashed gold momentarily. I'll think about it. Izuku said softly, willing the gold to melt out of his irises. Thank you for your advice. Izuku stood, giving Eraserhead a nod, and then started getting ready to clock out. His brain needed a break. He hopped on the motorcycle, clicked on his helmet, adjusted his backpack over his jacket, and sped off. Night Stalker was a case Izuku had started roughly 9 months ago, 6 months before the sludge villain and the copycat showed up. Eraserhead had been brought on board then, because the police weren't getting much farther after they raided Night Stalker's warehouse and found it had been cleaned out completely. It had been a devastating blow to the case, and they'd received heavy criticism from the commission. They'd promised results and had none to show for it. Izuku had been at the meeting with the representative of the commission, and Tsukachi had let him take the lead in explaining everything they'd done right, and how the failed raid didn't prove they were incompetent. Because Izuku got the chance to shine, rather than sit silently in the back, the representative didn't say a word about his age. Even she could see that Izuku wasn't a child to be treated as such. He wasn't an adult, but he deserved the respect of one, considering his 2 jobs and his intelligence. But Izuku couldn't help but feel like Katsuki might have had a point. He thrived in his 2 environments, but what if he combined them? What if he could save while catching villains? What if he could prevent harm that needs emergency healers, while he caught the villains before they committed horrific murders? Izuku was saving people and catching villains already, but it wasn't the same. As a hero, he could be out there with Eraserhead, catching the Night Stalker. Could he make a real difference as a hero? Izuku didn't know, and he kept driving. Mom? Izuku asked as he laid on the couch, both feet over the back of it because why not? Do you think I could be a hero? The rummaging in the kitchen stopped. I mean, pretend I could have all my work and jobs in pause mode. Do you think I could pull it off? The kitchen was silent aside from the noise of the running faucet where his mother had been washing the dishes Izuku had used in his late-night dinner. Sunshine, I think you can do whatever you put your mind to. Her voice spoke as her footsteps approached. Izuku turned his head to see her crouching beside the couch. What brought this on? Katsuki again. Izuku huffed. I thought he'd gotten over us being heroes together when I started my job at the station. He'd stopped asking anyway. He turned his head away, staring at the ceiling once again as if it held all the answers. Today, he said I could be a hero. I mean, he said I'd be a nobody hero compared to him, instead of the childish, I'll be number 1 and you can be number 2, I guess that we've both heard a million times. His mother laughed softly. He said I shouldn't settle for something like my current life, when I could go and be a hero. Izuku sat up then, removing his feet from the back of the couch and tucking them crisscross style as he turned to face his mom. Was he right? Am I meant to live this life, one that's exhausting but makes me happy, or am I meant to reach for the stars, risk it all, and possibly fall? His mother took one of his hands gently, and trailing a finger in circles around his palm. Why not reach for the stars? She murmured. You already hold the brightest in your hands, don't you? Her eyes, green and sad as she searched his face. I put you in that healer preschool because they said they could protect you while you were still learning to use your gift. I didn't do it because I was forcing you to be a healer. Izuku squeezed her hand in his. I know. He whispered. Naturally, because of your gift, you were pulled into being one anyway. You were so happy that you could help people, and you slowly just stopped wanting to be a hero. She sighed, looking down at their clasped hands. I didn't see it before, but maybe you didn't stop wanting, you were just steered in the opposite direction and never did anything to turn yourself back around. I thought as a healer, I was saving people the heroes couldn't. Izuku admitted. But I'm realizing. I want to help them before they have the chance to get hurt at all. As a healer, I can't do that. He took a deep breath and let it out. As a police investigator, I'm put on cases to help catch people. I can't be a detective because that would involve field work, but that's pretty much what I am unofficially. Everyone knows it. When I started high school, I'll be allowed to do field work, but it'll only be police work. I thought that was okay with me before, but today I paid more attention. I'm on a case with little to no solid evidence other than sightings and actual murders, and I just have to wait for more evidence. I'm waiting for him to kill again, and I realized maybe I'm not okay with that. Sunshine, look at me. Izuku felt gold melt into his eyes as he lifted them, sunlight curling comfortably under his skin. Inko looked at him seriously, eyes sharp and chin jutted out in firm determination. Izuku, you can become a hero. Izuku inhaled sharply. Nobody had ever said that to him before, and he quite suddenly understood Shinso. Izuku's eyes burned, tears pooling as he stared at her, vision getting wobbly. You think so? His voice broke, tears thickening in his throat. Sunshine, you already are. Her voice was so full of sincerity that Izuku choked on a laugh. It was a wonderful thing to hear, and Izuku hugged his mother tightly as small tears fell, soaking into his mother's shirt. Mom, I think I'm going to be a hero. Go Izuku, go. Izuku walked right into UA without hesitation. He followed the stream of students through the gates and to the auditorium, taking in the many rows of seats and the stage below. A giant screen was behind the stage, and Izuku figured the orientation would explain everything digitally, whereas the pamphlet just said it outright. He wasn't surprised when Katsuki sat next to him, and Izuku waved sarcastically to the boy who was surprised. Broccoli, what are you doing here? Katsuki glared as he regained his composure. I'm sorry, Kat, did I forget to mention I was going to be a hero? Izuku tilted his head with faux innocence. My bad. About dimmin' time, Broccoli. The blonde grumbled, and then he fell silent as he faced the front. Izuku resisted a fond smile at the blonde, and then looked up in blank surprise as the spotlights above the students shone on the stage and the main lights went off. The UA logo appeared on a screen behind the stage, yellow letters and blue background on full display. Izuku zoned his eyes on Present Mike, who had shown up and was grinning up at the students. For all you examinee listeners tuning in today, welcome to my show today. Everybody say, K. The hero leaned forward with a hand cupping his ear, but there was nothing to hear. Nobody responded. What a refined response. Present Mike shrugged dramatically, mock disappointment radiating through him. Then I'll quickly present to you the rundown on the practical exam. Are you ready? Yeewa! Mike yelled out the last part excitedly, eliciting no response once more. As it says in the application requirements, you listeners will be conducting 10-minute mock urban battles after this. The screen behind the hero shifted to show a main area in teal that read, You are here, surrounded by a diagram of linked and color-coded areas labeled AG. You can bring whatever you want with you. After the presentation, you'll head to your specialized battle centers, okay? All students around Izuku started checking their cards, and nobody responded, okay. Statistics were against Mike in the way of responses from his audience, and Izuku wondered why he was still trying so hard. In other words, they won't let you work with your friends, huh? Katsuki muttered. Izuku glanced at him, seeing he was examining Izuku's card next to him. Sunlight soaked into Izuku's hair, gold streaks forming as Izuku smiled. We have consecutive examinee numbers, but different battle centers. It's most likely to prevent team-ups. Izuku said thoughtfully. Fairness and individuality are taken seriously here. His number was number 2234, and he was in Battle Center B. Katsuki was red number 2233, but was in Battle Center A. Katsuki clicked his tongue in annoyance. Don't look at my card, Goldilocks, he said with no bite, eyeing Izuku's hair. Izuku huffed a laugh but said nothing as he tucked his card away. Izuku turned to face the screen and noticed it had changed. It showed a model of a city, which meant urban battles. 3 different types of foe villains are stationed in each battle center. As Mike spoke, dark shapes appeared on screen with numbers 1P, 2P, and 3P labeling them around the city. You earn points for each of them based on their level of difficulty. Zooming into the city to show a street block, an animated present Mike walked down the pavement approaching a dark shape labeled 1P. Your goal, dear listeners, is to use your quirks to earn points by immobilizing the foe villains. As Mike said this, Screen Mike defeated another obstacle labeled as 2P. Of course, attacking other examinees and any other unheroic actions are prohibited. Mike waved his index finger dramatically at the crowd. Izuku turned his head suddenly, hearing someone shoot to his feet a few rows ahead. May I ask a question? The boy was stiff, as if wearing medical braces, yet was uninjured. A rich upbringing then, probably a stickler for rules. Okay. Mike sounded a little confused, so his voice didn't come out as a shout, and he pointed at the boy. A spotlight lit the kid up, and he was wearing a yellow sweater uniform holding up the orientation pamphlet. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, then UA, the most prominent school in Japan, should be ashamed of that foolish mistake. The boy sounded scolding, disapproving as he spoke quickly and loudly. In a heartfelt way, he tapped his chest as he lowered the paper, expressing his sincerity. We examinees are here in this place because we wish to be molded into exemplary heroes, and mistakes like this are unacceptable. Okay, examinee number 7111. He made a thumbs up, grinning. Thanks for the great message. The 4th type of villain is worth 0 points. The screen zoomed out, back to the view of the city with the dark shapes around it, with an added figure labeled 0P. It was worth no points. This guy's an obstacle, so to speak. Going back to the street view, animated Mike was once again patrolling a street. There's one in every battle center, an obstacle that will go crazy in narrow spaces. Little Mike approached the silhouette labeled 0P, but instead of defeating it, he ran away and turned down a different street. It's not impossible to defeat, but there's no reason to defeat it either. The little character ran even farther away, which seemed an odd representation to Izuku, personally. It seemed important. I recommend that you listeners try to avoid it. Thank you very much. The still-standing boy yelled and then bowed deeply. Please excuse the interruption. He then sat down quickly and efficiently, which made Izuku only more sure he cared deeply about routine and rules. He'd asked bluntly and explained his thoughts, and then apologized for making a fuss. He'd need to loosen up to be a good hero, but the boy seemed fine enough, if a little rude. That's all from me. Present Mike held out his arms. Finally, I'll give you listeners a present, our school motto. The hero Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "A true hero is someone who overcomes life's misfortunes." Go beyond. Plus ultra. Mike announced, bent backwards in an odd contortion, and the screen showed the words plus ultra in yellow lettering by pink and blue swirls with a green background behind the words. Now, everyone, good luck suffering. Mike grinned one last time, and the spotlights went off. Izuku stood as the main lights came on, Present Mike left the stage, and his hair leaked back into full green mode. Izuku was confident, especially because he'd been given direct permission to bring anything he wanted. He already knew it was allowed, but Mike had specifically said the examinees could bring whatever they wanted. Maybe they wouldn't expect it, but it was allowed. Izuku headed to the locker rooms, same as everyone else, and found a space to change. He set his backpack down on a bench and opened a blue locker, unzipping his bag and pulling off his school uniform. As he redressed in his loose exercise gear, Izuku pulled out the belt and holster he'd brought specifically for the exam. The holster was solid, easy to close but hard to open for safety reasons, and the gun already snugly kept inside, loaded and live. The ammunition cartridges were clipped into the other side of the belt, and he made sure they were clicked in properly and wouldn't fall out. Satisfied, Izuku put his school uniform in his backpack and tucked it away in a locker. He then locked it, smiling as he was glad he remembered his lock. Izuku went outside, ignoring the people staring at his weapon or him in general, and loaded into the bus headed to Battle Center B. He didn't see Katsuki on his way, but he didn't really expect to anyway. It wasn't long before the bus left, and it wasn't too long before they rolled to a gentle stop. Izuku hopped out, assessing what he could. There seemed to be a few under 24 people he could see, split down the middle whether he could guess or see their quirks. They all stood in front of a massive gate, which Izuku assumed to be the entrance, some closer than others to the door. Izuku was farther back, and he took deep breaths to remain calm. He started his stretching routine he did every morning, slowly going through the motions to be careful of his gun holster. When he was finished, he stood neutrally and waited for a sign. Okay, start. Izuku took off for the doors, and they burst open faster than should have been possible. However, it was UA, so Izuku didn't question it. That listener has it. There are no countdowns in real life. Pounding of feet started behind Izuku, and he removed his gun as he ran, holding it with both hands at his side and pointed at the ground as he pulled back the slide. Rule 1 of firearms: never point a gun at anything you aren't willing to destroy, loaded for naught. Rule 2: never keep your finger on the trigger, that's how mistakes happen. A group of robots burst out in front of Izuku as the strict boy zoomed up behind him, and Izuku pointed his gun up and fired directly through the robot's glowing red-eye camera. It dimmed, crumpled and collapsed. Gasps and shocked screams came from behind Izuku, but he didn't stop as he methodically began taking out every robot he could see, even as other examinees began to take down their own. Izuku, assessing his clip down to only 3 bullets, as well as the growing number of people in his area, sprinted away in search of more robots. He fired directly upwards as he ran, making noise to attract the robots and finishing his clip. Flicking the switch, he ejected the empty clip and clicked it into a slot on his belt. He released a full one before lining it up with the gun as he slammed it into place. Hearing the affirmative click, Izuku pulled back the slide to load the chamber and once again aimed it at the ground with his finger flat against the trigger guard. He stopped, eyes shut as he listened, and Izuku turned as he heard a robot smashing through a building straight for him. Izuku grinned as more robots amassed to him, shooting them down 15 shots at a time before he needed to reload while dodging or ducking behind cover. Izuku was about to take off for a new zone, the one he was in littered with robot carcasses, when he paused, looking around for the source of the odd noise, spotted the smoke, and then the earthquake started. Izuku holstered his gun, clicked it into place, and then sprinted for the rumbling. People were injured by whatever took down those 2 buildings. They'd need him. Izuku saw dust clouds forming as the only warning before he saw the massive robot that towered up and over the buildings. It looked as if it was focused in on a single street, which meant the majority of the examinees were there. Izuku reached the proper street just in time to see a massive fist slam into the ground, crack the concrete, and send debris flying everywhere. "Everyone get back!" Izuku yelled to the frozen hero students. "Is anyone injured?" "No." "What the hell is that?" "Don't tell me that's the 0-pointer?" Izuku didn't care what they were saying as long as they were evacuating. He did care, however, when he heard a feminine cry of pain. Searching the debris in the area, he heard it with his eyes. He spotted her. Izuku ran for the girl, seeing that she was pinned, and also saw the robot was too close. He'd never be able to evacuate her in time without some kind of speed quirk. So he ran to her side, crouched down next to her pinned legs, and crossed his arms in front of his face. "Close your eyes," Izuku ordered, and then let sunlight pulse outwards protectively. Sunlight burst into a shield, larger than his last one, his forearms immediately turning into solid gold. The brilliant light covered Izuku and the girl in a near dome of golden light, spanning the whole width of the street in Izuku's area. He held it, and then shut his eyes as the gold crept down his wrists. Then, relief hit as he felt the robot smash into the shield. Izuku could feel the force used, of course, but it never affected him or the sunlight. Metal screeched, and Izuku vaguely wished he could see the giant robot getting absolutely obliterated as it tried to attack his shield. Gold melted into his eyes, and he glared upwards defiantly, even as he started losing feeling in his wrists. "Time's up." Izuku dropped the shield as the siren went off, panting, and the sunlight faded. It left a sparkling hue, like a golden rainbow in the air as it shimmered, and Izuku could finally see the robot. It had clearly tried to punch and then walk into the shield, and half of it had been utterly melted away. The other half had felt the force and repercussions, holes melted into it from metal being too close to the shield. Izuku turned away and assessed his arms. No feeling from wrist to elbow, but his fingers still all worked. Izuku then crouched, hands on his knees, eyes assessing the girl closely. She seemed to be staring open-mouthed up at him, and he smiled reassuringly, his healer's smile on full display. "My name is Midoriya. Do you need assistance in unpinning your leg, or were you panicking in the situation and unable to do it yourself quickly enough?" She turned a little pink, and Izuku assumed it was the latter. "I can do it, thank you for saving me." Izuku smiled at her. "Of course, it's what heroes do." Izuku stood and looked around, grinning as he saw Recovery Girl heading over and handing out energy gummies. "Good work, good work, good work," she was saying as her syringe cane clicked against the concrete. The girl he'd protected was tapping the debris, and Izuku realized she had some kind of gravity quirk, since it started to float and she wiggled out from underneath it. Interesting. She probably panicked during the emergency and thought she couldn't reach her legs from the angle she was pinned at. Rookie mistake, but understandable. Izuku waved to Recovery Girl and received a respectful nod in response. She'd been at the ceremony the Healers Center had for his moving up to rank A. It was a huge deal, understandably. Izuku was one of the 97 rank A healers in the whole world. He was also the youngest ever awarded the rank, so yeah. She had attended. Izuku wasn't finished at UA, even after he'd changed into his uniform and put away his gun, returned to campus and watched the other students leave. He headed to the principal's office. Izuku had called one day before the exam and requested a meeting with the intelligence hero. Izuku wanted a way to still work while also being a hero student. With the precinct, he'd already worked it out. Izuku, assuming he got into UA, would work from 6 p.m. to 1 a.m., and then he'd go home and sleep. The next morning he'd go to school, and then he'd clock in for his shift at 6 p.m. again. He and Tsukachi had discussed it in depth because Izuku didn't want to be a zombie all day every day by working a hardcore graveyard shift from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. Working the evening shift, Izuku could still get several hours of sleep before he was expected to be at school. However, this meant that Izuku would have to completely stop working for the Healers Center. It just didn't fit in his schedule, and he thought he was okay with that at first. But being a rank A healer with all that training and full certifications, Izuku couldn't help but feel he was wasting it all. Thus, his new and perfect plan had come in. The only wildcard variable was Nizu himself. If everything worked out, he could quit the Healer Center and still be a healer. Izuku knocked on the principal's door, and it swung open seemingly on its own. He entered, face blank, looking around. The room was a good size without being overly large, Nizu sitting behind a desk with a wall of windows behind him. There was a couch facing the desk right in front of the door, with a red rug and table between the desk and the couch. "Ah, Healer Midoriya, it's nice to finally meet you." Nizu smiled at him. "You asked for a meeting, yes?" Izuku nodded, and walked around the couch to take a seat. "I'd like to discuss your medical circumstances here at UA, as well as my own usefulness as a healer." Izuku said bluntly. Well then you have the floor. Nizu looked amused, and Izuku resisted a sigh. Regardless of the results from my hero course application, I'd like a position here at UA as a healer on your staff. My rank is the same as Recovery Girls, both of us being rank A healers with all proper certifications and training. To be honest, having only one healer here is irresponsible for a school this large and this prominent. In an institution such as this, I'd recommend at least 5 medics and 2 healers. Seeing as I'm wishing to attend, I wanted to hear your thoughts and suggest my own placement here as a healer for UA. Nizu grinned, and sunlight bled into Izuku's irises. Do you do that on purpose? Nizu asked curiously. I can, but usually sunlight vaguely asks permission and I let it do what it wants. Izuku answered, letting the conversation diversion slide. So your quirk is sentient? Again, only vaguely. Izuku tilted his head in thought. Sunlight feels my emotions, but it has its own reactions to them. For example, my shield. The first time I used it, sunlight lashed out due to my overwhelming desire to protect myself when the building I was in collapsed during a villain attack. I was about 6 years old at the time. So it moves around your body, expressing your emotions through small or large reactions. Nizu said, grinning. Izuku nodded. That's mostly accurate, yes. Izuku confirmed. Nizu was quiet for a moment before becoming more serious. Before we discuss the possibility of you taking a position here, I need to know the specifics of your quirk. Nizu eyed him curiously and seriously. When it was registered, you merely said sunlight lived inside your veins to be used at your disposal. There is no record anywhere of the exact use of your quirk and its capabilities. However, when you were 8, there was a cover-up in the healer center that caused them to move buildings. They never said why, but there was footage of a bright flash of light before the building became unstable. As well as that, your file says you had a quirk accident in your early life, but gave no details. Do you have an explanation? Izuku took a calming breath and then nodded. Sunlight isn't meant to be used offensively or as a weapon. It's meant to heal, to protect. However, it does possess such offensive capabilities. Izuku raised one hand, letting sunlight consume his fingers and make them glow a white brightness. I've always been a stable person, happy and content to do whatever I can to help, and I rarely get truly angry or upset. Since receiving my quirk, that has become a necessity rather than a personality trait. Extreme bouts of anger or anguish create devastating results. Can you elaborate? Izuku nodded. When I was 7, my father died in a villain attack. I was at school, and I didn't know until I got home. My mother was at work, and I saw a news rerun of the attack and a list of victims. Izuku shut his eyes, sunlight soaking back into him, and his hands were once again normal. Sunlight felt my anguish, and sought to take it away. As I started to cry, awful, heartbroken, grief-ridden sobbing, gold poured out of my eyes, and waves of sunlight exploded out of me. I incinerated the entire floor of my apartment building. In an instant, 9 apartments were disintegrated, and I killed 12 people. Luckily, we lived on the top level, so all other floors were safe from my anguish and the sunlight. The police came, but I was already unconscious. They marked the incident as a quirk accident, and I wasn't in any trouble. The healer center basically covered the whole thing up. I was too valuable. Besides, using sunlight in such a way, I was screaming and burning up, unconscious for days. I recovered, but Mother was careful around me for months. Not afraid of me, but for me. Izuku resisted a smile, remembering how that was the moment his mother realized she couldn't always protect him. After that accident, she started helping me a lot more. Nizu was watching when Izuku opened his eyes, liquid gold on beady black. And what happened with the healer center? I was angry. Izuku frowned. I felt such rage, burning hatred that ran through my veins like poison, and sunlight reached for me. I screamed, anger radiating out of me, and direct beams of concentrated sunlight went out in every direction coming from my chest. I barely managed to contain it, being a little older at the time, and I aimed it all downwards. Nobody was killed, but sunlight burned through all 6 floors under me, and deep into the ground. The building collapsed because sunlight melted a hole in the center of the foundation, and then the heat spread and cracked the whole thing. I passed out in less than a minute, and again I was in the hospital, unconscious and screaming, for nearly a week. Does happiness trigger such a severe reaction? Izuku hummed. Not in a weaponized way. Extreme joy will make sunlight come to the surface though. Usually it makes my hair turn a bright white gold, and I've been told my skin will glow when I'm really happy about something. The most recent thing I can think of was when I caught a villain I'd been chasing after for weeks. Sunlight made me glow after he was sentenced to life in Tartarus. If you feel the more negative emotional reactions coming, is there any warning, any way to stop it? Nizu asked carefully. It seems like an incredibly dangerous power to have. I've experienced it one other time, more recently when I was about 13. My friend, Bakugo Katsuki, he said my hands started to shake and my eyes went completely white, pupils and all, a bright and glowing white. He said gold flecks, like sun drops, floated in my hair and around my head as my hands began to glow. Izuku held out a hand and let sunlight bubble at the surface, making his palms glow softly. He said it wasn't a soft glow, it was a harsh and blinding light consuming my hands. Katsuki had me dunk my hands in ice water, over and over, even as it evaporated within an instant. It took about half an hour, but my anger calmed and nothing was destroyed. In addition, I'd like to add that my control is near perfect. Those 3 are the only times it's ever happened. Nizu nodded, smiling once more. I understand, this seems easily avoidable, and I'd love to have you as a staff member here. Izuku grinned, nodding in response, waiting for him to continue. Having only Recovery Girl for years has indeed weighed on my mind, but medics can't be qualified to work on pro heroes who are injured while working. They could with students, but it seems still unreliable. You, however, are a perfect solution. You have fully authority to heal whoever needs healing, pro or not. Thank you, sir. Izuku said, smiling a little. If I am accepted into the hero course, do you have ideas as to a schedule? I have my own thoughts, but I'd like to hear yours as well. Nizu grinned. Let's hear your ideas first, then. Izuku nodded easily, reaching into his bag and removing a stack of papers. He stood and came to stand in front of Nizu's desk, placing the papers down and leaning on the desk with one hand. Homeroom is first for heroics classes. Izuku said, pointing at the start of the times table with his free hand. Then are a few core lessons like English and math, and then battle training after lunch. Afternoon classes are more core lessons like literature. Nizu nodded, obviously already knowing this. My plan would be that I would attend homeroom with the other students, as well as battle training, but I'd spend the rest of the time in the nurse's office. Which, by the way, should be called the healer's office since you have no nurses or medics. Anyway, I could still take those classes, since I have no problem working out of textbooks, and even lesson plans would work for me. Of course, if I fail to keep my grades up, we would need to reconsider. I am confident that won't be a problem, however. He looked up to see Nizu grinning at the paper, clearly interested. You put a lot of thought and research into this. Nizu complimented. Thank you. Izuku nodded, turning back to the papers. If I don't become a hero student, I would recommend Recovery Girl and I share patience during the school day. I'd need to hack out the details with her specifically, for breaks and things for the both of us, but I'm guessing we both attend every day for the whole school day. Izuku finished happily, and looked back towards the principal expectantly. How did you manage to get a hold of our class schedule? Nizu asked, grin in place. The station has a copy of UA's schedule for every year. Izuku answered with a shrug. As an investigator, I have privileges that allow me to access such things. I see, wonderful. Nizu clapped his paws together. Well, the last thing I suppose would be your pay. How does it sound if you make as much as Recovery Girl does? I presume you know how much that is. Nizu smiled pleasantly while Izuku internally blue-screened. Recovery Girl made roughly 20 million yen per year. I mean, I won't say no to that much. Izuku swallowed, but isn't that a bit excessive for someone my age? Age rarely matters if all qualifications have been met. I'm aiming to pay you for your hard work and befitting your proper rank, Healer Midoriya. Nizu grinned, and Izuku nodded in stunned acceptance. Everything is set then. I expect you to show up every morning 15 minutes before homeroom to check that the healer's office is up and running for the day. Izuku smiled and nodded. Healer's office was much better than nurse's office. Lastly, if you have time, please come to the staff room every morning to retrieve a staff schedule for the day so you know which hero classes are most likely to need healing at what times for the upper years. Izuku nodded again. That made sense. If Class B was in battle training when A was at lunch, he should expect B students to be injured more than he should expect A students. Perfect. Thank you for your time, Principal. Izuku put all his papers away carefully and bowed to the small mammal. I'm looking forward to joining the staff this year. I'll be informing the rest of the staff of your new position, but not who will be filling it. It will be more fun to just say we've hired a second healer. Izuku resisted a smirk at Nizu's slightly mischievous grin. Can you make it to the start of year staff meeting? It's in 3 days at 9 in the morning. I can make it. Izuku confirmed. Do you have a place I can park my motorcycle? Nizu's grin widened even further, if possible. Why yes, though you'll need a staff card to access the garage. Nizu reached into his desk and pulled out a blue card that was completely blank and handed it over. This is a temporary one. After the start of year staff meeting we'll set you up with a more permanent one. The garage is in the back of the school, and the card will open the back gate. Again, thank you very much. Izuku bowed. Thank you as well, Healer Midoriya. Your position here will greatly help our institution and recovery girl's burden. Nizu gave him a grin and a nod, and Izuku waved as he left. He walked through the empty halls, all students having gone, and Izuku let himself smile softly. He was going to be a healer for UA, and possibly even a hero student. Maybe he really was meant to be a hero. The staff meeting. Izuku woke up more excited than he had in weeks on the morning of his staff meeting. His staff meeting. A meeting where he was a staff member of UA. It was surreal almost. He kissed his mother's cheek goodbye as he headed out half an hour before the meeting time, started up his motorcycle, and zoomed away. UA was only about 10 to 12 minutes away on his bike, but he didn't want to risk being late because he couldn't find the back entrance. It didn't turn out to be a problem, since he found the back entrance exactly where the school map said it would be. The archway was identical to the one out front, except the entrance was blocked by the metal security doors. There was a card scanner in front of the massive metal gates. He stopped next to it and pulled off his gloves, flicking up his visor, and took out the card before inserting it into the scanner. He grinned when it lit up green, and the card was gently ejected back into his hand. The gates opened, though a red sensor was lit. It would probably immediately lock if someone without a card tried to enter with him. He flicked his visor shut and grinned behind it as he slowly rode onto campus and down into the garage under the school. Izuku parked his bike and kicked out the bike stand, took off his helmet and shook out his hair. Sunlight curled there, happiness making white gold stream through and cover all his hair with light gold. Izuku made his way through the halls, lit and empty as he spotted the door to the meeting room he'd found on the map. Izuku was suspicious he didn't see anyone else, even though it was 5 minutes until the meeting, but he knocked on the door anyway. Come in. Nizu's voice came through a speaker on the door, which made sense since the room was probably soundproof. Izuku opened the door, and found himself staring at a room with a U-shaped table opening towards Izuku. He blinked, seeing 14 pairs of eyes on him, all seated with folders in front of them. You know, I should have guessed that you'd give me the wrong time so I'd show up last. Izuku said, eyes sweeping the room as they turned gold. And yet I am still surprised by it. Nizu laughed, and Izuku shut the door behind him as he stepped into the room and walked over to the empty seat between Nizu and Recovery Girl. Izuku catalogued everyone he could see. Eraserhead, Vlad King, Power Loader, Present Mike, 13, Midnight, Snipe, Cementos, Hound Dog, Lunch Rush, Ectoplasm, Nizu himself, and Recovery Girl. The last was someone Izuku didn't recognize, a scarecrow of a man. With blonde hair and deeply shadowed eyes. Nizu, who's this? The blood hero, Vlad King asked roughly, eyeing Izuku. He seemed to be taking in the gold eyes and hair suspiciously, and Izuku waved sarcastically as he sat down. That is Midoriya Izuku, healer and police investigator of the Musutafu Prefecture. Eraserhead said tiredly. I'm assuming he's our new healer on staff. He gave Nizu an exhausted look. Exactly right, Aizawa. Nizu clasped his paws together with a grin. Everyone, as he said, this is your new staff member. Midoriya? Izuku stood again, giving them his healer smile and bowing slightly. I'm healer Midoriya, identification number 177908, rank E. I'm 15 years old, and I'm excited to be working with all of you. He received nods from some, while others just stared, eyeing him up, and he sat again. Hey, you were the little listener from Battle Center B. Mike exclaimed, snapping his fingers. You took the heroics exam. You made that huge shield. That was him. Cementos asked thoughtfully, didn't he look different? Little green fellow. Izuku huffed a laugh and pushed his sunlight below the surface, letting green soak into his hair and eyes. Cementos's expression didn't change, but his voice was a little bit higher pitched when he next spoke. Ah, I see. Young man, what exactly is your quirk? Izuku eyed the unknown blonde. My quirk is classified. Izuku said evenly. Even Nizu couldn't find any record of it, and had to ask me directly during the meeting we had. The whole room seemed to recoil in shock, even Eraserhead's eyes widening. Nizu. Mike looked to the principal. Delightful, isn't it? Nizu cackled. It's true, his quirk is very powerful, wonderful, and equally dangerous. Izuku scowled. It's only dangerous when used wrong. Izuku said coldly. Nizu only grinned. Of course, healer Midoriya. Of course. Izuku turned his head away from Nizu as he noticed ectoplasm leaning forward. Isn't it always dangerous? As far as I saw, you created a shield of pure energy that melted a zero-pointer. Izuku hummed, face going blank. Sunlight can be dangerous, of course, but when used incorrectly the results are devastating. Izuku said seriously, would you be up for a small demonstration? Midnight asked eagerly, I could always knock you out if need be. None of you would survive a demonstration. Izuku said, not breaking eye contact as gold flashed into his eyes once more. She recoiled. Young Midoriya, I'm sure that's an exaggeration. The unknown man laughed nervously. It isn't. Nizu denied. Unfortunately, if any of us tried to witness such a thing we would all perish. Even All Might himself wouldn't survive such a thing. Izuku narrowed his eyes at the wording, and then his brain caught up as the blond man slumped slightly in his seat. It's curious. Izuku drawled, leaning on a hand as he perched an elbow on the table. Eraserhead straightened, recognizing the tone. Nizu never says anything that doesn't have a double meaning. Mentioning All Might was unnecessary, and yet he said it anyway. You said my answer was an exaggeration, in a way that sounded as if you were above such things as a 15-year-old's quirk. When Nizu mentioned All Might you slumped in defeat, as if knowing that made all the difference between my words and his. Pair that with your blonde hair, scarecrow appearance, and it's curious. It's almost as if All Might was a popped balloon. Izuku examined his nails as the man coughed up blood in surprise. Now, you wouldn't know the answer, would you? Izuku raised his eyes to meet the blue in the man's shadowed face, smiling innocently as he did. Young man, you must understand that this is a national secret. The man coughed, and then extravagantly became All Might in a puff of steam right in front of his eyes. Right now, I can only work as a hero for about 3 hours a day. It's an injury I got from an enemy's attack 5 years ago. Half of my respiratory organs were destroyed, and I lost my whole stomach. I've become emaciated from repeated surgeries and the aftereffects. The man deflated again with a bloody cough, standing, and showed a wound to his stomach, purple and bruised as if his torso was caved in and never healed. Izuku stood and walked over, examining it closely. Well, I could definitely fix this. Izuku nodded to himself. Horrible injury. My condolences about your career. Then he shrugged and started back towards his seat. W8. Izuku glanced over his shoulder, nearly laughing at the look on Aizawa's face from behind the Scarecrow Man. You could seriously heal me? Izuku nodded and turned back to face him fully. Honesty, it wouldn't even be hard. Izuku shrugged delicately. It would take, 15 to 30 seconds max. All Might looked positively ravenous. First, I'd like to know what you'd do upon being fully operational and uninjured. Izuku raked his eyes up and down the man slowly. I'm guessing you decided to take a position as a teacher to ease the transition from heroics into retirement? Izuku raised an eyebrow. If I take away your time limit, what's stopping you from dropping your teaching duties and going back to being a hero full-time? Izuku put his hands on his hips. Since you've already chosen to be here for this school, I'd expect you to actually be a teacher like you promised. I won't heal you otherwise, which is my right as a healer. Being late to work because you decided to play hero would be unacceptable. Izuku glared as he crossed his arms, and the man hesitated. I agree with healer Midoriya. Nizu said in the silence. Tashinori, you have commitments here, whether you're injured or not. The man, Tashinori, sighed. I accept your terms and will focus on the next generation of heroes. Izuku nodded curtly. Excellent. Sit. The man did as he was told, and Izuku approached. Remove your shirt, please. I'll need skin contact for a job like this. Izuku pulled hand sanitizer out of his pocket and cleaned his hands as the man began removing his shirt, and Izuku shook his hands dry. Hold still, he warned. Izuku soaked his hand with sunlight, palm glowing to the surprise of the teachers, and he pressed his hand to the caved-in wound on All Might's side as he shut his eyes. Sunlight spilled into the man, curling into the injury and filling his muscles and veins with warmth and light. Izuku pressed, ordering the sunlight to heal, and it did. He heard gasps around the room, and Izuku knew the sunlight was visible through Tashinori's skin as it worked its way through and regrew organs, stitched muscles together, and fixed severed nerves. Bruising lightened and blood filled previously deadened veins, and flesh grew under Izuku's hand. He felt the emancipation falling away like shed skin, and Izuku released a shaking breath as he removed his hand. Opening his eyes, Izuku saw the purple crawling bruises were gone, and his torso was a fuller and healthier shape. The whole picture of the All Might in front of him was reminiscent of how he'd looked at the beginning of his heroics career. No more Scarecrow. Izuku nodded firmly, satisfied. Your organs and muscles are fully operational. I've regrown your stomach and your right lung, as well as dissolved that horrible fake diaphragm they surgically added. Izuku re-sanitized his hands as he spoke, and ran a clean hand through his now mostly dull golden curls. Your veins are good as new, as are your nerves. Your heart was fine, if a little weak. You'll need at least 2 weeks of rest after this, absolutely no hero work whatsoever. Believe me, I'll find out if you have. All your organs and muscles are brand new, so you'll need to be excessively careful not to strain yourself. It's like trying to lift 400 pounds with no training. Also, my bad, your whole muscly form doesn't exist anymore. If your quirk was a transformation type, it isn't anymore. Well, you're as healthy as you were at the very beginning of your career, but that means your muscles are significantly weaker. Do you understand? Izuku looked into blue eyes that were clear of shadows, a healthy face with awe and disbelief hanging in them. Izuku snapped his fingers in the man's face. Hey, I'm talking to you. If you don't understand, just say so, and I'll send a copy of your new instructions to the Might Tower manager. You actually did it. The man whispered. What the hell is your quirk? Izuku rolled his eyes and headed back to his seat. I believe we already covered that the information regarding my quirk is classified. Even from All Might. Izuku sat down again, knowing he'd need an ice bath when he got home. He definitely had a mild fever. So, Nizu, what's on the agenda for the start-of-year meeting? Izuku folded his hands politely in front of him, tilting his head curiously, ignoring All Might putting his shirt back on. We were about to cover the new students. The staff should be informed of the quirks and abilities of all students. Nizu said. Have you decided on who will attend which class? Vlad said, leaning forward. Yes. As usual, Aizawa will be receiving the more dangerous quirks who need to learn temperament, while you will have the quirks who need more growth and fine control. Vlad nodded, clearly already knowing this. Nizu handed Izuku a folder visually identical to the other staff's and gestured for everyone to open theirs. The last 2 pages, if you please. Izuku flipped open the thick folder and found the last 2 pages, a photo of Eraserhead on one page and a photo of Vlad at the top of the other. 20 smaller photos were on each page, names and quirks labeled next to each picture. We'll be going through Vlad's class first. Izuku nodded as he took in the names and quirks he could see, listed in seat number order. Oasiosetsu, quirk, Vold, Kabarasan, quirk, Kamakiri Togger, quirk, Razor Sharp, Kawarshirhai, quirk, Kendo Itsuka, quirk, Big Fist, Kodayu, quirk size, Komori Kinoko, quirk, Mushroom, Shiozaki Ibra, quirk face, Shishida Jiroda, quirk, Shota Nairenjiki, quirk, Twin Impact, Tsunatori Pony, quirk, Horn Cannon, Subraba Kozia, quirk, Solid Air, Tetsu 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 Tetsu, quirk, Steel, Tokage Setsuna, quirk, Lizard Tail Splitter, Fukidashi Manga, quirk, Comic, Hananuki Juzo, quirk, Softening, Bondo Kojiro, quirk, Semiting, Minoma Nito, quirk, Yanagi Reiko, quirk, Poltergeist, Rinhiryu, quirk skills. The ones you'll need to focus on most will be Copy, Twin Impact, Weld, Gyrate, Razor Sharp, and Black. Those quirks have a lot of potential, and it's likely the children aren't using them to their full advantage. Nizu said, eyes on the list. What about Comic or Semidine? Vlad asked, frowning. Both are easier to use and to figure out. Nizu placated. Of course, all your students will need support and advice. Ken Vlad King nodded in approval. Aizawa, you're next. Izuku moved his eyes to the next page, eyes flashing gold as he caught sight of his own name. Ryumayuga, quirk, Naval Laser. Ashido Mina, quirk, Acid. Eshuitsuya, quirk, Fro. Ida Tenya, quirk, Engine. Yurarko Chogo, quirk, Zero Gravity. Ojiro Mashireo, quirk, Kaminari Denki, quirk, Electrification. Kirishima Ijiro, quirk, Hardening. Koda Koji, quirk, Hanivas. Sato Rikido, quirk, Sugar Rush. Shoji Mizo, quirk, Dupli Arms. Shinso Hitoshi, quirk, Brainwashing. Jiro Kyoka, quirk, Earphone Jack. Siro Hanta, quirk, Tokoyami Fumikage, quirk, Dark Shadow. Todoroki Shoto, quirk, Half Cold Half Hot. Hagakure, quirk, Invisibility. Bakugo Ketsuki, quirk, Explosion. Midoriya Izuku, quirk, Sunlight. Yayoro Zumomo, quirk, Creation. The ones you'll need to watch are Explosion, Dark Shadow, Sunlight, and Half Cold Half Hot. Nizu said to Eraserhead. All for different reasons, but all extremely volatile. Eraserhead nodded. Why is Sunlight on that list? To go through healer training, he should have perfect control. Eraserhead wasn't being rude, just curious, so Izuku gave him an honest answer. It's because Sunlight is partly sentient. It asks permission for things like changing my eye color or my hair color, and I see no reason why not to let it. Izuku shrugged. However, it can also be dangerous, as I mentioned. Izuku looked straight at Aizawa, seriousness in his gaze. If you ever see my eyes go completely white and begin to glow, you need to shut my quirk off immediately and keep it off until midnight can knock me out, or I otherwise lose consciousness. Do you understand? Eraserhead didn't question it, nodding seriously in response, and Izuku turned back to the page. Midoriya, your letter of acceptance will be arriving in the mail in 5 days. Please keep your position as a student private until it does. Nizu said, moving past Izuku's intense warning. Why, Principal? Izuku put a hand on his heart in mock offense. I don't know what you mean. There's been absolutely no confirmation of my placement here, and I won't hear otherwise until my letter arrives. Nizu grinned at him, and Izuku laughed lightly. Snipe raised a hand. If I may, Midoriya, why are you enrolling as a student if you're already a staff member? Snipe's helmet didn't. muffle his words as much as Izuku thought it would, and he hummed thoughtfully. I've been working as a police investigator since I was about 8, and a healer since I was 6. Izuku answered, but as I reached my current age, I realized I also wanted to be a hero. So here I am, becoming a hero, while being a healer, while also still keeping my job at the police station. Izuku gave his healer smile again, and Snipe nodded in acceptance. How are you going to be balancing all of that? Hound Dog asked seriously, are you going to be overworking yourself? Izuku shook his head. No, I've figured it all out with my superiors. Izuku denied. I'll be at school, being a student and a healer, and that means I'll be quitting my job at the healer center. Once school gets out, I'll have some time to relax before my shift at the station starts at 6, and then I get off around 1 a.m. and I'll go to bed. That's a rough schedule for a kid. Midnight frowned. It's a good thing I'm not a normal kid, then, Midnight. Izuku said, voice flat. It's true. Eraserhead put in tiredly. Midoriya is the lead investigator in the Night Stalker case. I report directly to him. Tashinori coughed, briefly surprised there was no blood, and then spoke. You report to him? All Might clarified. Surely not, he's a child, even a talented one with a marvelous quirk. He's the second in command at his station, which is above me in many situations. Eraser stared All Might down. As an underground hero, I have authority over him in situations of crisis, but he's just below Detective Tsukachi in the chain of command. He's more than a child with a powerful quirk, I assure you. Aizawa is right, Yagi. Nizu chided. He's on the same level as Recovery Girl and Tsukachi, and you should treat him with the same respect you treat them. All Might, Yagi Tashinori, was looking between Aizawa, Nizu, and Izuku, as if he was looking at a maths problem upside down in another language. All right. He laughed nervously. What's the next thing on the agenda? Nizu hummed and flipped through his folder. General Studies, Classes 1C, 1D, and 1E. Yamada, we'll start with yours, turn to page 18. Izuku smiled as he found the right page, already happy with his new position. Izuku was sitting on the couch, upright this time, filling out his costume allowance paperwork thoughtfully. He didn't need to update his quirk, so wrote exactly what was on his quirk registry. Quirk, sunlight. Sunlight lives in the user's veins to be used in a variety of ways, as the user chooses. Izuku tapped his chin with the pen as he double-checked his costume design. He'd already given Nizu the uniform he'd be wearing as a staff member while working in the healer's office, but his hero costume was much different. He wanted it to be perfect. Izuku! His mom called as she shut the front door. Your letter is here. Izuku grinned. Thanks, Mom. She ruffled his half-golden hair as she handed it over, already knowing he'd rather open it alone. Izuku gave her a nod of thanks as he headed to his room and shut the door. Spinning in his desk chair, Izuku opened the letter and pulled out a set of folded papers and a hologram disc. Izuku set the disc down and clicked it on, and blinked as All Might's face consumed his immediate vision. I am here as a projection. All Might pulled away from the camera, grinning. He looked the same as he did after the meeting, healthy and strong, and he'd masked his mild loss of muscle by wearing a suit. It was an awful yellow, but if people noticed he looked different they'd probably assume it was because of that. I came to this town to work at UA, and I am here with your exam results. Izuku rolled his eyes at the drama, but figured it would definitely help the students get excited about school. You received top marks in the written exam. Excellent work, young Midoriya. On top of that, you collected 58 points in the practical exam. However, there is also a secret scoring given by a panel of judges as another basic ability we at UA look at. A scoreboard showed on the hologram, showing 45 rescue points and 58 villain points in first place, right next to his name. Midoriya Izuku, 103 points. All Might declared, hands on his hips as the camera went back to him. Welcome, young Midoriya. This is your Hero Academy. The hologram switched off, and Izuku grinned. He'd done it. He'd already known, but now he knew. Sunlight consumed his hair and eyes, bright white gold spilling out, and even making his skin glow faintly. Scooping up the papers he'd removed from the envelope, Izuku headed out to join his mom in the kitchen. She'd want to know, and he couldn't wait to tell her. Izuku was going to be a hero. The caterpillar. When Izuku woke up at 5:30 in the morning, he didn't feel like slaughtering his alarm clock for once. Instead, his eyes popped open, his hands slammed into his alarm clock, and he grinned. First day of school. Izuku went through the motions of his routine, stretching, brushing of teeth, showering, dressing, skimming his notes, stretching again, and then breakfast. He was sort of rushing, so by the time he was out the door and hopping on his motorcycle, it was only an hour after he woke up. He pulled into UA at 7:12 in the morning, and Izuku happily scanned his new staff ID card. Nizu had used the same picture Izuku had on his police and healer ID card, which showed him grinning at the camera with glowing gold hair and sunlit eyes. Izuku had been so proud, so excited for the picture, sunlight couldn't resist making an appearance. Izuku headed straight for the healer's office, and was once again elated to see they'd changed the sign. It no longer read Recovery Girl's nurse's office, but instead said the healer's office. It showed Izuku and Recovery Girl's proper status, as well as reminding everyone there was more than Recovery Girl on board now. The lights were off, so Izuku slipped on some gloves, flipped them on and started getting the room ready for the day. He opened the curtains, letting the wall of windows flood the room with cloud-covered light. Izuku checked the stock of medical supplies, jotting down what they were low on. He changed the sheets on the bed, throwing the old ones in the washer which was attached to the office bathroom. Izuku finished up by wiping down and sanitizing all the counters and surfaces. When he was looking at the room, grinning with hands on his hips, he nodded happily to himself. He then turned to see Recovery Girl entering and waved. "Hiya," said cheerfully. She blinked and then sniffed. Recovery Girl could clearly smell antiseptic and looked briefly confused. "Oh, I sanitized everything and wiped down the counters. I changed the bed sheets and I'm washing them now. Don't worry, I got everything set up." "Midoriya, I never do all that in the morning," Recovery Girl said, brows scrunched in confusion. "What brought this on?" Izuku frowned, hard. It's proper healer protocol to sanitize healing spaces at least 3 times a day. Once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and once before closing. We may be healers but germs still exist, you know. Nothing bad has happened in all my years here, so I don't think it's necessary. Recovery Girl denied, coming further into the room. Izuku put his hands on his hips and glared at her. She paused. "This will become a mandatory part of our day, Recovery Girl," Izuku ordered coldly. "There are 8 cameras in this room leading straight to Nizu's office. I'll be informing him of the proper healer protocol, and if you fail to comply where he or I can see it, you'll lose your license. The healer code isn't optional, it's necessary to prevent avoidable problems like infections. This hasn't ever been a problem before now." Recovery Girl glared at him right back. "I'm going to give Nizu the benefit of the doubt and say he didn't know it was a break in the healer code, or that he just misplaced his trust in you and never double-checked your work." Izuku narrowed his eyes at her. "It's half-hour till homeroom starts, so I'll be on my way. I'd recommend putting on your gloves. This is a sterile space, and touching things bare-handed could contaminate it, meaning it would need to be sanitized all over again." Izuku grabbed his backpack from where he'd hung it up and headed for the door. "I'll be back after homeroom. This is no longer only your office, so mess with my healer space and you'll regret it." With that, Izuku stormed out. His eyes flashed gold with irritation, but he did not take it out on the students he saw as he stalked the corridors. Izuku was in the UA student uniform, but it had a special gold seams and healer's badge on the front of it. People did a double take as he stalked by with a blank face, some looking shocked while others looked curious. Izuku didn't care as he walked briskly to the teacher's lounge. He shoved open the door and headed to the schedule desk, glaring at nothing and everything as he did so. "Whoa, roll out of bed the wrong way?" Midnight's teasing voice came from behind him. Izuku growled and turned slightly. Recovery Girl broke 6 of the healer code regulation rules just this morning. Izuku bit out sharply. She's all but said that over the years she's gotten cocky and careless and believes her quirk is infinite and immune to germs. "Oh, what's this?" Nizu popped out of seemingly nowhere. Izuku lessened his glare as he turned to the principal. She doesn't wear gloves in the clinic, a violation. She doesn't sanitize the clinic in the morning, a violation, the afternoon, another violation, or the evening, another violation. She doesn't wash things directly after using them, such as the sheets, relying on paper coverings, and I doubt she even makes long-term patients change into proper hospital garments. Izuku threw his hands up in exasperation. She's grown complacent in her old age, and I warned her that if she doesn't bring things up to code, I'll have her lose her license. Can you do that, young man? All Might. Izuku whipped his head around. So, if a hero suddenly starts randomly smashing buildings and murdering civilians just because they want to, you'll let them keep their license? All Might recoiled. Of course not, but these small? These aren't just tiny infractions. Izuku spat out, stabbing a finger in All Might's direction. People die. Infections due to mishandling of medical gear during first aid, germs getting in during surgeries, even food particles contaminating a sterile space can lead to horrific diseases that can only be cured by heavy antibiotics and sometimes a miracle. Izuku was shouting now, and he took several deep breaths as he felt sunlight pooling in his hands. Control. Izuku exhaled roughly, but still glared at All Might even as he lowered his voice. I take my job very seriously, All Might. You might not understand, but I'll be mad if I let my patients receive subpar medical attention. All Might didn't move, eyes huge in his newly healthy face. Izuku turned away, searching the desk in front of him once again for the proper schedule. Healer Midoriya, I'll be watching Recovery Girl more closely from now on. Nizu placated, Izuku's eyes not leaving the papers. Rest assured, everything will run smoothly even with you in classes. Izuku scooped up the proper schedule and turned to the principal with a bow. Thank you, principal. Izuku said. I apologize for losing my cool and for shouting. Despite my passion for my work, it was wrong of me. Izuku turned to All Might, scowling, but he bowed his head slightly to the hero. Apologies to you as well. I meant every word I said, but raising my voice was uncalled for. Izuku went to the door, tucking his schedule into a folder in his bag as he went, and then turned to look over his shoulder. Eraserhead, if you're going to go to class in the sleeping bag, you'd better hurry. Worming your way will take approximately 6 minutes, and you have 11. Izuku then swept out of the room. A tiny smile made its way onto his face as All Might's voice rang out behind him shrilly. Aizawa, when did you get here? What are you wearing? Izuku pushed open the door to see Katsuki sitting with his feet on the desk, with examinee 7111 standing in front of him with a harsh and stiff type of posture. Don't put your feet on the desk. The boy yelled. Katsuki smirked. Don't you think that's rude to the upperclassmen and the people who made the desk? Katsuki snickered. Nope. What middle school did you go to, you side character? The blue-haired boy straightened, pressing a hand to his heart and chopping his other in the air like a robot. I attended semi-private academy. My name is Ida Tenya. Izuku stepped inside the classroom as Katsuki went to respond. Semi? So you're a DMN elite, huh? Katsuki leaned forward, nearly bending him half with his feet still on his desk. Looks like I'll have fun crushing you. Crushing? That's cruel. Do you truly aim to be a hero? Izuku shut the door behind him with a click, interrupting them. Eyes were suddenly on him, but Izuku just strode forward. Ida, we do not criticize others for their aspirations of being heroes. It's unkind. Izuku walked right up to them, standing beside Katsuki. My friend here just wants to be the best hero he can be. He wants to crush the villains in his way and win like All Might. Is that so wrong? Izuku raised a challenging eyebrow, and Ida seemed stunned. What he'd said was true. Izuku may not be a fan of All Might, but Katsuki certainly was. Broccoli. I'm still mad you beat me in the entrance exams. Katsuki grinned sharply. I'll get you next time. Izuku laughed, delighted. Sure you will, Kika. I'd like to see you try. He ruffled Katsuki's hair as the boy smirked challengingly and Izuku slipped into the seat behind him. I see. My apologies. Ida bowed to Katsuki, but then turned to Izuku as he pushed his glasses up. You're not wearing the proper uniform befitting a UA student. It's disrespectful to the school as a whole and the rest of the students. Izuku examined his fingers boredly, picking invisible dirt off his nails dramatically. I insist you change immediately. Class will be starting soon. The boy then went silent, and Izuku looked up with a raised eyebrow. You done? I thought you'd drone on longer, my bad. Izuku drawled. Someone choked behind Izuku, and he resisted a grin. This is my proper uniform. It was issued to me due to my status as a rank A healer, along with my position here at UA as a staff member. Izuku pulled out his ID card and flashed his eyes gold at the boy. As you so kindly pointed out, class is about to start. I'd recommend taking a seat, Ida. The boy opened his mouth, but the door slid open suddenly. Oh, that curly hair. You're the plain-looking one. Izuku looked her up and down with one eyebrow raised, noting her distinctive hair, and found she was the girl he'd saved. The one with the gravity quirk. You passed. You were so cool saving me like that. Your golden shield was awesome. It's nice to meet you, but the teacher is coming down the hallway. Izuku smiled. You have approximately 4 seconds to move. The girl squeaked, and Ida, who was still standing, gasped. They both rushed to their seats and left the door wide open. Izuku sighed and heard the yellow sleeping bag stop right outside the door. Midoriya, what did I say about warning my students? The tired voice piped up from outside. Absolutely nothing, Eraserhead. Izuku grinned, lacing his fingers together as he leaned his elbows on his desk. I don't believe we addressed it at all. There was a sigh, and then Aizawa flopped inside the classroom, yellow caterpillar mode still in effect. The students gasped, some squeaking dramatically. Aizawa unzipped his sleeping bag and stepped out boredly. I'm your homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shoda. He said blankly. Nice to meet you. Izuku waved happily, smothering a laugh at the deadpan look he received in return. It's kind of sudden, but put this on and go out onto the field. He then dropped a pile of gym uniforms on the teacher's podium. Midoriya, this one is yours. He tossed a clothing ball of gold and blue, and Izuku stood to catch it. Wicked. He grinned. Aizawa then departed, and Izuku turned to the class. Just in case nobody knows where the locker rooms are, feel free to follow me. Izuku strode out of the room, kids rushing to grab a uniform behind him, and he laughed quietly. He walked slowly and nonchalantly, students catching up easily. He led them to the locker rooms, gesturing to the girls one door over. They shared a wall, so it was easy for Izuku to lead everyone and not just the boys. Izuku changed quickly, exchanging his UA uniform for his specialized gym one. It was styled the same as the rest, but the red parts in the shoulders were bright gold. He noticed Shinso to his left, a little more filled out with muscle, and he waved to the boy. Shinso didn't have a shirt on, so he looked a little embarrassed, but he waved back with a sheepish grin. Izuku walked out, hero students following like little ducklings, and brought them all to the field right outside the gym building. Aizawa was waiting tiredly, and he gave Izuku a grateful nod. Izuku just grinned. We're doing a quirk assessment test. Aizawa announced blankly. A quirk assessment test? The class exclaimed. Why did they feel the need to repeat what he'd just said? What about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? Uraraka shook her fists out nervously. Aizawa sighed. If you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events. A few people gasped lightly, or made noises of confusion. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That's also how the teachers run their classes. A few people looked worried, some blank, some determined. Izuku resisted a snicker. You kids have been doing these since middle school too, right? Aizawa held up his phone, showing a screen with letters and bullet points. Physical fitness tests where you weren't allowed to use your quirks. The country still uses averages taken from results from students not using their quirks. It's not rational. Well, the Ministry of Education is procrastinating. Aizawa turned to Bakugo, shifting to put his hands in his pockets. Bakugo, you finished near the top of the practical exam? In middle school, what was your best result for the softball throw? Katsuki perked up a little, but his voice was bland. 67 meters. He answered calmly. Then, try doing it with your quirk. Aizawa reached out a hand, seemingly pulling a softball out of thin air. Katsuki took it and walked to the circle, rolling his shoulders and stretching. You can do whatever you want as long as you stay in the circle. Hurry up, give it all you got. Katsuki just nodded. Blow it up. Blow it up. Blow it up. Izuku chanted quietly, bouncing excitedly. The students around Izuku looked at him funny, and Shinso took a long step backwards warily. Katsuki wound his arm back, grinned, and threw. Die! The ball exploded, hurled away from everyone and wafted a hot breeze at the class. Izuku grinned happily and cheered. Know your own maximum first. Aizawa said to the class. That's the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. He tiredly raised his phone for everyone to see, and it read 705.2 m. The class gaped and several yelled in surprise. Yes. Izuku pumped a fist and Katsuki turned to grin at him. Great job, Katsuki. 750 meters? Seriously? Izuku turned with a raised brow to a boy beside him. It's 705 actually. Izuku informed him. The blonde blinked and squinted at the screen. What's this? Some pink-skinned girl exclaimed, putting her hands together in excitement. It looks fun. Izuku sighed. You've done it now. He whispered. We can use our quirks as much as we want. As expected from the hero course. Someone else yelled. Izuku shook his head, smiling ruefully. It looks fun, huh? Aizawa murmured lowly. The class froze. Aizawa raised his eyes, staring hard as he took in the class seriously. You have 3 years to become a hero. Will you have an attitude like that the whole time? Aizawa smirked, eyes low as he spoke again, voice dropping with amused mirth. Alright. Whoever comes in last place in all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential and will be punished with expulsion. The class gaped, some yelling out in indignant fear, and Izuku fought a grin, lips wobbling upward as his shoulders shook slightly from the effort to contain his laughter. Katsuki hit the back of his shoulder with a fist and Izuku choked. They shared a grin. Last place will be expelled? But it's the first day of school. The girl Izuku saved exclaimed, high-pitched voice worried. No, even if it wasn't the first day, this is too unfair. Izuku turned to the side, glaring, but Aizawa beat him to it. Natural disasters, big accidents, and selfish villains. Calamities whose time or place can't be predicted. Japan is covered in unfairness. Aizawa spoke softly, scowling. Heroes are those who reverse those situations. If you wanted to go talk with your friends at Mickey D's after school, too bad. For the next 3 years, UA will do all it can to give you one hardship after another. Go beyond. Plus ultra. Aizawa grinned tiredly, one finger beckoning them challengingly. Overcome it with all you've got. Izuku clapped his hands together, grinning with excitement. Katsuki rolled his shoulder again, smirking, and Izuku noticed several other students straightening with seriousness or determination. Eraserhead's speeches at the station before missions were good, but his teaching was great. All right, demonstration's over. Aizawa said, voice back to bland normality. The real thing starts now. Try your best. Aizawa led them to a 50-meter sprint track, robots at the finish to mark time. Izuku hopped in place to get the blood flowing, grinning in excitement. Izuku had been training physically since he was little, starting at the healer preschool. They didn't slack on the idea of physical capabilities and protecting oneself. Izuku paid close attention to everyone's quirks, noting everything down as if it were police evidence, and memorized it. Ida, speed quirk based on the engines in his legs, probably related to ingenium, most likely needs to chug juice of some kind as fuel. Frog mutation, jump far distances, probably useful and extendable tongue, amphibian-type skin and longer fingers, most likely vulnerable to extreme temperatures on either scale. Well, he's like a fish in water. Aizawa deadpanned from Izuku's left, staring at Ida. Izuku choked. It'll be worth seeing what others do. A boy with a tail, strengthened muscles and durability in the extra limb, useful for mobility, good for combat. Zero gravity, he needs more info. Some kind of sticky substance from the girl's feet. She didn't make a lot, but she could probably use it better by sliding across it. More info needed. A blue laser from a boy's belt. Izuku wasn't sure if it was a quirk or a support item, but it was useful in apparently short time frames. Finally, Izuku lined up right beside Katsuki, and they exchanged slightly feral grins. On your mark. The high voice of the robot squeaked, "Get set." The start sound of a mock gunshot went off, and Izuku sprinted flat out down his lane. Katsuki went slower, needing to prep his explosions, so Izuku had the lead for a solid second. Explosion speed. Katsuki screamed, and then blew down his lane with his hands propelling him as he held them behind him. Izuku laughed freely as he raced over the line barely after Katsuki. 4.13 seconds. The robot chirped for Katsuki. 4.49 seconds. Izuku jogged to where Katsuki stopped, and they exchanged fist bumps firmly. When I use both hands, the force disperses. Katsuki lamented to him. Izuku went on his tiptoes to lean his elbow on Katsuki's shoulder. You'll figure it out. Izuku laughed. I can't wait to see you legitimately fly one day. Katsuki cackled. DMN right, broccoli. He grinned, clenching his hands into fists and moving to the side with Izuku. Next was grip strength, and Izuku watched amusedly as Katsuki just grit his teeth and did it normally. Explosions wasn't exactly helpful for that test, and Izuku was living for it before his score was higher than Katsuki's. He also got the chance to see the boy with 6 arms do his, a score of 540 kilograms. Izuku faintly remembered seeing him at Battle Center B with him for entrance exams. Izuku also spotted a boy with oddly shaped elbows that he guessed ejected some kind of projectile as a long-distance type. Oh, think your explosive speed will make it over? Izuku stage whispered to Katsuki as they started the standing long jump. One girl just pulled a vault pole out of her cleavage, which Izuku found immensely interesting. Was she creating it from within her? Or did her body function as a sort of storage device she could store things in and pull out later? He'd need to ask. Definitely. Just watch me fly this sheet. Katsuki cracked his knuckles, and Izuku laughed in response. He sort of flew, which was interesting to watch. Katsuki made it all the way across, even if he landed badly and wobbled. When it was Izuku's turn, he bounded over and landed only a foot or two away from the other side. He grinned in satisfaction. As the others finished up, he glanced at Shinso, who seemed like he was vaguely panicking, and Izuku frowned. Izuku padded over and leaned his head and shoulders to the side to be in Shinso's line of vision. The boy blinked, and then turned so he could fully see Izuku. Hiya Shinso, how's it going? Izuku asked. The boy grinned tiredly. Better than it would have been if I'd never asked you for advice that day at the cafe. The boy admitted, voice a little blank. I'm happy you're here. Izuku smiled. I haven't seen you use quirk, what is it? If I can ask. The boy sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It's brainwashing. Izuku blinked. That's super fancy. Why haven't you used it? Shinso looked so horribly confused, it was sort of cute. What do you mean? It's not gonna help me jump further. Yes, it could. Izuku hummed. The girl with the dark ponytail? If you brainwashed her during your turn, you could have made her give you a pole to use. During the strength test, make the guy with multiple arms do yours for you. Softball throw, use Katsuki, or the brown-haired girl with the zero gravity quirk. Izuku shrugged, grinning. This test is rigged. It's about how hard you try, not the results. Eraser is trying to weed out the people who don't try, or as he'd say, people with no potential. Potential to grow, to be a hero, that sort of thing. Shinso was staring at him wide-eyed, and Izuku caught sight of Katsuki glaring at the purple-haired boy and beckoning Izuku over to where the next test was starting. I gotta go. Seriously, try it. Your quirk is super powerful. Izuku jogged over to Katsuki, who smacked him in the back of the head as Izuku laughed. Broccoli-looking butt. He muttered. Stop helping the competition. The next test was repeated side steps. Izuku was once again intrigued, seeing the ponytail girl just make little feet-sized trampolines to bounce off of. Izuku did his best, and he got barely under Katsuki for that test. He glanced over at Shinso, who appeared to be thinking really hard, but then just did the side steps himself. Izuku was excited for the ball throw. Not because he would do better in that one, but because he had a theory that the majority of the students would just end up throwing it. He predicted, over half, at least 11 students throwing the ball normally. Izuku counted as they went. Creation Girl, ball launcher. Candy Cane, normal throw. Tail Boy, smacked it with his tail. Invisible Person, normal throw. Rockhead, normal throw. Redhead, normal. Blonde with the black streak, normal. Dude with the arms, normal. Big lip dude, normal. Frog Girl, used her tongue. Purple Girl, normal. Pink Girl, normal. Wow, his quirk was cool. Speed Dude, threw it normally. Elbows, threw it normally. Sparkling, normal. He got his 11. Izuku grinned. Even if the guy with the several arms only barely counted, once Izuku himself did his throw, that would be a true 11. The Gravity Girl went up for her turn, and inevitably did send it to space. It just kept going and going until Aizawa sighed and just gave her an infinity. Izuku was up next, and he bounded up the circle happily. He was given a ball, and he threw it. Izuku received 69 meters, and he wiggled his eyebrows at Katsuki. I'm officially cooler than middle school Katsuki, it's a miracle. Izuku said conspiratorially with mock drama. Katsuki grinned and punched him lightly in the arm. Oh no, whatever shall I do? Katsuki drawled, snickering. Izuku laughed, and then watched as Shinso made his way to the circle. He was fidgeting with his fingers and looked nervous. Ooh. Shinso! Izuku yelled. The boy turned in surprise, but he grinned at Izuku's encouraging smile. Sensei, you said anything goes as long as I stay in the circle? Shinso double-checked. Yes. Hurry up. Aizawa said in the same dead voice. Shinso nodded firmly. Really quickly. Gravity Girl, what's your name? Shinso turned to her with an eyebrow raised. She squeaked and then beamed at him. I'm Uraraka Ochako. She then stilled, her stance loosening and her pupils went white. Come over and use your quirk on this ball, and then walk back to your spot. Shinso ordered calmly. The class gasped, some yelling in surprise as Uraraka did as he said, slowly shambling forward and touching the ball with 5 fingers. She turned back, leaving the circle, and Shinso threw the ball upwards and let it just go. He grinned as he disappeared into the sky, and turned to Aizawa. The man sighed and held up another infinity symbol. Uraraka looked around confusedly, awareness and brown irises returning. What was that? Shinso just shoved his hands in his pockets and walked back to the group of students. Hey, you did something to her with your quirk. The boy with the tail yelled. Izuku narrowed his eyes, seeing clenched fists and panicked eyes. Shinso turned, dejected, so Izuku stepped forward. And? Izuku said coldly. The whole class turned in surprise, the tail boy freezing. Sunlight spilled into Izuku's eyes and curled into a few strands of his hair in response to his ire. So what? You got something to say? The boy hesitated, but he nodded, eyeing Izuku's hair carefully. What did he do? What's his quirk? Izuku hummed, tapping his chin in thought. Is that your business? Izuku asked, tilting his head innocently. Quirks are personal, you know, and people knowing the secrets of them might just make life harder, you know? Izuku crossed his arms and waited. But he didn't even ask permission, and he messed with her head. The boy exclaimed. The girl laughed nervously, waving her hands. No, it's fine. Aizawa-sensei said anything is allowed. She looked between Izuku and Tail Boy anxiously. Quirk discrimination is illegal. Izuku said, examining his nails. As a police investigator, I'd recommend not doing that in front of me. Also, Aizawa is getting impatient. It's time to move to the next test. Izuku then just walked away, Katsuki at his side as he moved to the inside gym for the next test. Shinso seemed to scramble after him, and the rest of the class followed. Tail Boy was silent. Izuku paired with Katsuki for sit-ups, and he innocently let Katsuki go first before he went. Goldilocks. Katsuki yelled. You did that on purpose. Izuku cackled as he finished, panting and putting a hand to his aching abs. I did no such thing, I let you go first out of the goodness of my shining heart. Like shit you did. Katsuki sulked. You wanted to top my score, you bisudi. Izuku leaned in as he smirked at Katsuki. It's not my fault you can't do as many sit-ups as me. Losing by only 3 too bad. Katsuki smacked the back of his head, and Izuku laughed easily. He and the pink girl were side by side, and basically neck and neck, for the seated toe touch. Izuku actually had mild perspiration on his forehead as he bent further in half, but eventually admitted defeat by 2 inches. I'm totally going to practice this every day now, I hope you know. Izuku said, offering a fist bump. I'll beat you someday. She laughed, delighted. No way. I'm a dancer. She exclaimed brightly. Can't beat this flexibility. As Izuku laughed, he realized the long-distance run was last as they walked back outside. He immediately went over to the ponytail girl after sending Katsuki a wave. Hey,